Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 2 of What If I Was Reborn in Naruto as the legendary Orochimaru with the Mad Scientist system. Let the tale begin. Chapter 21. The Python took the contract scroll, and with a puff of white smoke, disappeared from Orochimaru's room. Orochimaru looked down at the snakeskin in his hand, murmuring to himself, I felt the aura of this white snakeskin, and couldn't resist coming up from the basement? How fascinating. Could this snakeskin have belonged to the White Snake Sage? The White Snake Sage, ruler of Ryuchi Cave, was one of the 3 legendary sages, alongside the Slug Sage and Toad Sage. The snakeskin in Orochimaru's possession exuded a unique aura, one that could only be associated with a creature as powerful as the White Snake Sage. But as far as Orochimaru remembered, the White Snake Sage was enormous, far beyond the size of the snakeskin he held in his hands. The pieces didn't seem to fit together. Forget it, Orochimaru shook his head, dismissing the thought. I can't access Ryuchi Cave now anyway. Thinking too much won't lead to answers. With no clear direction to investigate the mystery, Orochimaru decided to shelve the matter for now. After all, Ryuchi Cave was a sacred and hidden place accessible only to those who knew its location. Unlike the toads of Mount Maiboku, the snakes of Ryuchi Cave couldn't use reverse summoning techniques to bring others to their domain. In the end, Orochimaru knew that if he wanted answers, he would have to find Ryuchi Cave himself someday. For now, he could only wait and focus on his current goals. His next issue was the Kusanagi sword, which he had recently acquired. While he wasn't particularly skilled in swordsmanship, Orochimaru recognized the sword's immense value as a weapon. He had obtained it and didn't intend to just hand it over to someone else for free. However, a new problem arose: where to store it. The idea of storing it inside his body, like the original Orochimaru did, crossed his mind. But he quickly dismissed the thought. Keeping a sword inside his body felt both unsightly and unnecessary at this point in time. The Kusanagi sword wasn't as critical to him now as it might have been later in his life. Sealing it in a scroll was an option. But scrolls were external objects. If lost, the Kusanagi sword would be lost too. This was clearly not an ideal solution. Then, he considered placing it in the system warehouse. This option seemed promising. However, it had one drawback: when retrieving objects from the system, the process involved a spatial fluctuation, something akin to the space-time ninjutsu used by Uchiha Bito, not the white smoke seen with conventional space scrolls. While the spatial principle was intriguing, using such a technique at his current age might draw unwanted attention. People might become suspicious if a 6-year-old was suddenly able to access another dimension. Orochimaru pondered for a moment before coming to a conclusion. It doesn't matter. I don't need to use the Kusanagi sword often, so where I store it isn't important for now. With that decision made, Orochimaru waved his hand. A ripple in space occurred, and the Kusanagi sword disappeared into the system warehouse. After securing the summoning technique contract and the Kusanagi sword, Orochimaru felt much better. His mood improved, as he now possessed tools for future growth. He knew that all 3 sacred lands, Mount Maiboku, Shikatsu Forest, and Ryuchi Cave, taught Senjutsu, sage techniques. Senjutsu was essential for dealing with the Akatsuki clan in the later stages of life. In the original series, Orochimaru's body was too damaged from his numerous experiments, and his repeated body swapping through living corpse reincarnation caused rejection between his soul and his physical form. This made it impossible for him to learn Senjutsu, leaving him dependent on absorbing Senjutsu chakra from Kabuto. But now, everything was different. This younger version of Orochimaru still had plenty of potential. His body was untainted by the severe side effects of his future experiments, and he was filled with endless possibilities. He had big plans to surpass even the Orochimaru of the original timeline. The next morning, Orochimaru headed to the training grounds, continuing his usual routine. But before he even arrived, he could already hear a familiar voice bickering in the distance. I'm telling you, Orochimaru doesn't know how to summon anything. You didn't believe me yesterday, so do you believe me now? I asked him myself, and he said it. How can that be? Even you, an idiot, can summon. There's no way Orochimaru can't. Tsunade's voice retorted, disbelief clear in her tone. Idiot. Did you just call me an idiot, you flat-chested washboard? Jiraiya shot back, clearly offended. Flat chest. Say that again if you dare. Tsunade's face contorted with fury as veins bulged on her forehead. Her fist clenched tightly, her anger bubbling over. Jiraiya wasn't backing down. Yeah, you heard me. You're just a flat-chested, unfeminine. You're dead. Bang! Tsunade's punch shot out like a missile, but Jiraiya was already prepared this time and dodged it, grinning as he taunted her. Did you really think you could hit me again? You blockhead. Naya. Jiraiya made faces as he sprinted away, trying to stay one step ahead of Tsunade's wrath. Seeing that she couldn't catch him, Tsunade kept up her chase, clearly frustrated. But then... Oh, Orochimaru? Tsunade's eyes landed on Orochimaru, who had just arrived at the training grounds. She came to a halt, surprise evident on her face. Orochimaru. You're here. Tell her, you can't summon anything, right? Jiraiya ran up to Orochimaru like a man pleading for backup. Tsunade, now equally interested, turned her gaze to Orochimaru. She, too, was curious about the answer. Orochimaru remained calm. I can. Ha ha, Tsunade, you heard it, wait, what? Jiraiya's triumphant smile faltered as his brain caught up to what Orochimaru had just said. You can? But that's not what you said yesterday. Jiraiya exclaimed, feeling as though he'd just been played. Orochimaru glanced at him. I couldn't summon anything yesterday. But today I can. What? Jiraiya and Tsunade stared at him, stunned. Learning to summon creatures overnight? What was going on? Ignoring their bewilderment, Orochimaru looked around. Where's Hiruzen-sensei? Oh, Hiruzen-sensei isn't coming today, Jiraiya replied, finally snapping out of his shock. He told us to wait for you and then head to the Konoha Hospital to help out. The hospital? Orochimaru paused, his mind racing as a thought came to him. I see. Let's go, then. Without waiting for the others, he turned and began walking toward the Konoha Hospital, his mind already planning his next steps. The hospital. A perfect place to obtain blood samples from various ninjas. Hey, Orochimaru. Wait for us. Tsunade called after him. Man, this guy really doesn't understand teamwork, does he? Jiraiya grumbled as he hurried to catch up. Chapter 22. Konoha Hospital. Hiruzen was there, busy helping out, given the influx of injured ninjas. Bed 11 needs another blood transfusion, a medic shouted. This wound is deep and almost infected. Didn't you disinfect it while on the front lines? Another nurse asked, her tone full of concern. We tried, but the medical facilities on the front lines are limited, replied the injured ninja, grimacing in pain. At that moment, Hiruzen noticed Orochimaru, Tsunade, and Jiraiya entering the hospital and quickly stood up to greet them. Ah, you're here. Come on, help out. You're not skilled enough to handle advanced treatments, so just focus on bandaging for now. He turned to a young woman wearing a white coat with a brown ponytail tied neatly behind her back. Biwa, have the three of them help with the bandaging. The woman, none other than Biwako Sarutobi, Hiruzen's wife, looked up and replied, Got it. There's plenty of bandaging work, so I'll have them assist the nurses. At this point, Biwako was only in her 20s and already dedicated to her work as a medic. Orochimaru took a quick glance around the hospital. The number of injured people today was staggering, far more than he had ever seen on his previous visits. Why are there so many wounded? Orochimaru asked, clearly puzzled by the overcrowded state of the hospital. Hiruzen smiled slightly, though there was a trace of sadness in his eyes. You're quite observant, Orochimaru. Well, it's no secret now, so I'll tell you. The fighting on the front lines has eased, and we've managed to transport some of the more seriously injured soldiers back to the village for proper treatment. Ah, I see, Orochimaru nodded in understanding. The sheer number of wounded was indeed the consequence of the ongoing war. The injured were being brought back from the front lines, those who had narrowly escaped death but still bore the marks of battle. This is war, Jiraiya muttered, looking at the injured shinobi with a pained expression. It's awful. Tsunade, standing beside him, wore a similarly somber look as she observed the wounded. For Orochimaru, however, the sight didn't evoke the much emotional reaction. He had mentally prepared himself for this, knowing full well the harsh reality of war. While he helped with the bandaging, he couldn't help but covertly scan the hospital for something else as prey. It wasn't long before Orochimaru's eyes locked onto the hospital's blood storage room. Given how chaotic the hospital was today, no one would notice if he slipped in for a moment. That night, after a long day of helping at the hospital, Orochimaru returned home. He was exhausted but far too eager to rest just yet. On his desk were more than a dozen small syringes lined up neatly, each containing a small amount of red liquid blood samples Orochimaru had carefully extracted from the hospital's blood storage room. Despite his fatigue, he immediately began his testing. After everything he had learned so far, his interest in genetic research had only deepened. How could he possibly rest when such invaluable samples were at his disposal? Ding! It has been detected that this sample contains water attribute energy. Fusion will grant the power of water. Orochimaru's lips curled into a satisfied smile. As expected, blood is the best genetic sample. He knew the results being detected reflected the chakra attributes of the blood donors. Previously, when he had tested Tsunade's hair, the system had only extracted a small amount of life energy. But now, with blood samples, he could unlock the chakra nature of other ninjas. Tsunade herself had chakra with 4 different attributes: water, fire, lightning, and earth. This difference between the energy extracted from her hair and blood made it clear to Orochimaru just how much more potential lay in the use of blood for genetic analysis. The tests continued. Ding! This sample contains 2 chakra attributes, fire and lightning. Fusion will grant the power of fire and lightning. Ding! This sample contains the wind attribute. 1 blood sample after another, each providing Orochimaru with valuable data. Some contained only a single attribute, while others had 2 or even 3. Then suddenly, ding! A special human gene sample has been detected. Fusion can grant the genetic traits of this sample. Special genes? Orochimaru's eyes narrowed in curiosity. System, check the details. Holding the syringe with the special blood sample in hand, Orochimaru's heart began to race as he awaited the analysis. Host, please wait. The system is analyzing the sample. Analysis complete. The gene belongs to the Uchiha clan. Fusion with this gene will grant the traits of the Uchiha, including the potential to awaken the Sharingan. The Uchiha clan? Orochimaru murmured, his golden eyes gleaming with excitement. When he had tested Tsunade's cells earlier, the system had only granted him a small portion of life energy, nothing particularly noteworthy. But now, this blood sample from the Uchiha clan promised something entirely different: the ability to inherit the traits of the Uchiha, possibly even the Sharingan. But why the difference? Why had Tsunade's hair yielded only a small amount of life energy, while this Uchiha blood sample promised the potential for far more powerful abilities? Senju and Uchiha are supposed to be genetically equal. So why did Tsunade's sample result in such a minor gain, while the Uchiha sample offers something far greater? Is it simply the difference between hair and blood? No. The reason lies in the activation of genetic traits. Tsunade has not awakened the sage body, which is why you cannot gain that ability from her genes. However, the owner of this Uchiha blood has awakened the Sharingan, which is why you can gain the power of the Uchiha through fusion. As the system explained, Orochimaru quickly grasped the concept. It wasn't just about having the right genes, it was about whether those genes had been activated. Tsunade had the potential for the sage body, but since she hadn't awakened that ability, it wasn't available for extraction. On the other hand, the Uchiha donor had already awakened the Sharingan, which meant that power was ripe for the taking. Orochimaru's knowledge of genetics and biology had grown immensely, and he understood that transplanting cells often resulted in rejection. But what made the Uchiha clan so special? Of course, it was the Sharingan, that dazzling, coveted dojutsu that many sought after but few could wield properly. The spiritual energy within the Sharingan was so potent that most people couldn't handle it. Only those with Uchiha blood could fully control the power of the Sharingan. Those like Kakashi, who had a transplanted Sharingan, couldn't activate or deactivate it at will. But now, if Orochimaru could successfully fuse this Uchiha gene into himself, he would not just transplant the Sharingan, he would awaken it as if he were born with Uchiha blood. 7 days later, the gene extraction task was complete, and the system had unlocked new data, the gene fusion process, as well as something called gene fusion fluid. With this new information, Orochimaru's suspicions were confirmed. He could now fuse the genes of others and gain their powers. This process was far more advanced than the crude cell transplant seen in the original series. It wasn't just about inserting cells from one person into another's body. It was about true fusion, extracting the genetic material of one individual, processing it, and then merging it with another person's genetic code using the gene fusion fluid. In other words, Orochimaru could now combine the traits of two different beings into one. If he mastered this technique, he could gain the power of anyone's bloodline. He could fuse Uchiha genes to awaken the Sharingan. He could fuse Hyuga genes to awaken the Byakugan. He could even fuse the genes of the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju, to awaken the sage body. Yes, awaken, not merely transplant. This was the key difference. By using gene fusion, he could naturally awaken the powers of other bloodlines within his own body. Gene fusion fluid can perfectly merge two different sets of genes? Orochimaru mused, his grin widening. Haha. So, if I truly master this technique, I could give anyone the Sharingan. I could give anyone the wood release. I could even extract the chakra of Asura and Indra and cultivate my own Rinnegan. Chapter 23. The next task for Orochimaru was the creation of the gene fusion fluid, a scientific breakthrough that would bring him 8,000 technology points upon completion. But as Orochimaru glanced over the technology points he had accumulated, he realized that they held little immediate value for him. Most of the items he could purchase with them were auxiliary tools, useful, but not essential at this point in time. His focus had shifted entirely toward his current project. The subsequent unlocked technology, the gene repair fluid, didn't hold much appeal either, at least for now. The gene repair fluid could supposedly repair any severely damaged genes or cells, but Orochimaru's attention was focused on something else: the gene fusion fluid. With his priorities set, the next few months for Orochimaru were simple, a strict routine of research and missions. His days revolved around two main activities: completing the missions assigned by Hiruzen, and then immediately returning home to immerse himself in genetic experiments. Everything else happening in the world seemed irrelevant to him. The First Ninja World War was still raging, but as a genin, Orochimaru remained largely untouched by the direct consequences of the conflict. He felt no urgency, especially since the war was nearing its conclusion and Konoha had ample fighters at the ready. If the war had been more desperate, even genin like him would have been forced into the Chunin exams and sent to the battlefield. But for now, Orochimaru had time. Time to train, time to study, and time to pursue his scientific goals without distraction. And so, 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. By the end of Konoha Year 18, Orochimaru was 8 years old. His home had transformed into a veritable laboratory, filled with a wide variety of animal and plant specimens. He smiled with satisfaction as he surveyed the rows of bottles and jars filled with preserved snakes, insects, rats, ants, birds, and other creatures. His experiments had yielded significant progress, and his house now resembled a full-fledged research facility, albeit a small one. In these 2 years, with the assistance of the system, Orochimaru had evolved into a genuine genetics expert. He had developed basic gene enhancement serums, gene repair fluids, gene extraction, and, most importantly, gene fusion fluids. His understanding of genetics now far surpassed anything this world had ever seen. Weapon technology had also been unlocked early in the process, but developing weapons required much larger equipment and access to rare minerals. With his current limited resources, there was no way for him to delve into weaponry. So, for the past 2 years, Orochimaru had dedicated himself entirely to genetic research. As Orochimaru studied genetics further, he had learned a crucial lesson: something he had once believed, based on human fantasy, was a myth. For example, he had once thought that simply transplanting ant genes into a human would grant that person hundreds of times the strength of an ant. But in reality, the strength of ants was due to their unique body structure, where bones encased their muscles in a way that allowed for tremendous proportional strength. This had nothing to do with genetics. Human and ant body structures were fundamentally different, and ant genes couldn't be utilized in the way he had once imagined. Moreover, Orochimaru had learned that while the gene enhancement serum was incredibly potent upon first use, its effects diminished with each subsequent dose. Even improving quality of the basic genetic enhancement serum to higher levels would only result in marginal improvements, nothing that could compare to the natural strength and resilience of a Senju clan member's cells. As he reviewed his stockpile of genetic drugs in the system warehouse, Orochimaru frowned slightly. It seems, it's time to strike a deal with Konoha. For a while now, Orochimaru had been working on the gene fusion fluid, but his research had hit a bottleneck due to insufficient blood samples. After nearly a year and a half of trial and error, he had finally succeeded in developing the first gene fusion fluid. Yet, even that was not enough to propel his research forward. He needed more inspiration, more samples. After completing the fusion fluid, he unlocked the gene repair fluid, followed by the intermediate gene enhancement serum. These two projects were relatively simple extensions of his earlier research. It had taken him only 4 or 5 months to finish both. Orochimaru believed that with his newfound experience, recreating the gene fusion fluid would now take him no more than a few days. Scientific research was difficult, but once you crossed a certain threshold and had enough knowledge, it became easier to achieve breakthroughs with minimal effort. That was Orochimaru's current reality. If not for the help of the system, even he wouldn't have been able to make such immense progress in just over 2 years. But just as he immersed himself in his thoughts, a rapid knock sounded at his door. Orochimaru! Orochimaru! The voice called urgently. Orochimaru sighed, walking to the door. He opened it to find Jiraiya standing outside, his usual hyperactive energy practically radiating off him. "Why are you yelling?" Orochimaru asked, slightly irritated. "I challenge you. Come on, let's go to the training ground." Jiraiya pointed enthusiastically in the direction of the training ground. Without waiting for Orochimaru's response, Jiraiya grabbed him by the arm, trying to pull him along. "Challenge?" Orochimaru raised an eyebrow and smoothly pulled his hand out of Jiraiya's grip. "No." Over the past 2 years, Hiruzen had arranged for numerous sparring sessions between Orochimaru and Jiraiya. Each time, Jiraiya had been utterly outmatched, failing to land even a single decisive blow on Orochimaru. As a result, Orochimaru had grown tired of these one-sided fights. After all, continually beating an opponent who couldn't challenge him was boring. Hey! I learned a new move this time. I can definitely beat you now," Jiraiya said with a mischievous grin, clearly excited by the idea. "And once I defeat you, Tsunade will have to become my girlfriend. Just thinking about it gets me all fired up." "Keep dreaming," Orochimaru replied flatly, pouring cold water on Jiraiya's fantasy. "Even if you win, Tsunade still won't be interested in you." Orochimaru wasn't just speaking from memory. After spending so much time with Jiraiya and Tsunade, he had come to understand Tsunade's taste in men. Tsunade's 2 main criteria for a partner were simple: strength and looks. As the princess of the Senju clan, it was only natural that Tsunade would have high standards. She herself possessed immense strength, and while her beauty was undeniable, she had every right to be selective. Jiraiya? He had decent strength, but his looks, well, they left a lot to be desired. Strength alone isn't enough, Jiraiya. Even if you manage to improve, that face of yours isn't going to win her over, Orochimaru said with a hint of amusement. Jiraiya frowned, his confidence deflating for a moment before his usual bravado returned. TCH, what do you know? Just wait and see. I'll get her to notice me, no matter what. Orochimaru sighed inwardly. He knew how determined Jiraiya could be, but he also knew that some things weren't going to change no matter how hard Jiraiya tried. Chapter 24, Orochimaru's sharp words hit Jiraiya hard, but Jiraiya was notoriously thick-skinned. He wasn't going to let Orochimaru's comments knock him down so easily. How do you know it's impossible if you don't try? I believe that if I persist, I'll be able to win her over one day. Jiraiya said, his voice filled with stubborn optimism. Then, he quickly changed the subject. So, are we going to fight or not? Orochimaru didn't hesitate for even a second. Not interested. His refusal was blunt and definitive. Orochimaru had more important things to do. He had no time to waste on Jiraiya's silly challenges. His days were filled with experiments and advancing his knowledge, not indulging Jiraiya's fantasies. Jiraiya looked deflated. He had trained for days, hoping to test out his new techniques, but here was Orochimaru, shutting him down with zero interest. It felt like throwing a punch into cotton, no resistance, no impact. Just utterly frustrating. You. Just as Jiraiya was about to argue further, something caught his eye. His gaze wandered toward Orochimaru's open door, and his expression quickly changed to one of curiosity. Hey, Orochimaru, what's going on in your house? Jiraiya's attention was completely diverted now. He noticed the various glass jars, test tubes, and other experimental equipment scattered around the room. Whoa, what are all these? Seriously, what are you doing in here? This wasn't the first time Jiraiya had been to Orochimaru's house, but he'd never really been inside before, nor had he seen what Orochimaru was up to. Usually, Orochimaru kept the door shut tight and ensured no one could peek in. But this time, perhaps by accident, or maybe just because Orochimaru was no longer trying to hide it, the door was open, revealing what looked like a laboratory inside. Though all the advanced scientific equipment provided by the system was neatly stored away, the standard Konoha-grade tools and supplies were enough to leave Jiraiya stunned. Bottles filled with strange liquids, jars containing mysterious specimens, and piles of books were neatly arranged around the room. Jiraiya's jaw dropped. At only 8 years old, the sight of so much scientific equipment was dazzling. These are all yours? Of course, Orochimaru answered flatly. What the heck are you doing with all this stuff? Jiraiya asked, still in shock. Improving my strength, Orochimaru responded matter-of-factly. Improving your strength? Jiraiya blinked, then let out a laugh. What kind of nonsense is that? Everyone knows the way to get stronger is by training every day, not playing with bottles and jars. What could this possibly do? Orochimaru gave him a withering look. With your intelligence, I wouldn't be able to explain it. Orochimaru. Jiraiya. What are you, huh? What's this? At that moment, Tsunade suddenly appeared, dropping down from the roof and walking straight through the open door. She looked around the room, her eyes widening with surprise. She had seen many things in her young life, but this? This was unexpected. Tsunade hadn't known that Orochimaru was conducting research. She looked at the various bottles and jars, her curiosity piqued. Her eyes then drifted to a pile of genetics books sitting on the nearby table. Without thinking, Tsunade grabbed one of the books, flipping through a few pages. This is amazing. You actually understand all this? I didn't understand it at first, Orochimaru replied calmly, but now I do. When he had first started his research, Orochimaru had indeed been confused by much of the scientific jargon. It had taken him half a year just to develop his first batch of primary gene enhancement fluid. Now, after 2 years of intense study and practice, he could make multiple batches in just a few days. Wait, you started studying this stuff a long time ago? Tsunade quickly grasped onto what Orochimaru had just said. Orochimaru nodded slightly. With 2 years of rigorous training under his belt, Orochimaru's strength had grown significantly. He no longer felt the need to hide his activities from Tsunade or Jiraiya. Besides, Konoha already had medics and scientists researching similar fields, so his work didn't seem too outlandish. What set Orochimaru apart, though, was the fact that his research, guided by the system, was far more advanced than anything Konoha's researchers could dream of. Tsunade was stunned. A memory came rushing back 2.5 years ago. Shortly after they had graduated from the academy, Orochimaru had borrowed some money from her. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it since Orochimaru had repaid her so quickly. Now, though, she realized he had probably used that money to fund these experiments. Oh my god, this is incredible. You were only 6 years old back then, and you were already researching all of this? Tsunade's mind raced, trying to process how a child one of her peers, no less, could have been doing such advanced research at such a young age. She couldn't help but wonder, was this because Orochimaru had lost his parents? Was his obsession with science a way of coping with that loss? Tsunade's empathy kicked in, and she immediately began to rationalize Orochimaru's actions. As expected of you, Orochimaru. You're incredible, she said with genuine admiration in her voice. But Jiraiya, having heard enough, couldn't hold back his skepticism any longer. What's so great about it? We're ninjas. Our strength comes from training and fighting, not from messing around with weird experiments like this. Jiraiya had conveniently forgotten that, just moments ago, he had been praising Orochimaru's skills. But now, seeing Tsunade admire Orochimaru's research stung him in some strange way, even if he couldn't quite understand why. Tsunade immediately shot back, even if you don't understand it, that doesn't make it any less impressive. Besides, anything is better than what you do, idiot. Yeah, I'm an idiot. But no matter how dumb I am, I'm still better than you, you flat-chested. Before Jiraiya could finish, Tsunade's temper flared. What did you just say? Jiraiya, you're dead. I'm dead? Ha! Come and catch me first. Jiraiya laughed, backing away with a smug grin. Enough, Orochimaru interjected sharply, his voice cold. Don't cause trouble in here. Tsunade and Jiraiya froze in their tracks. Even at 8 years old, Orochimaru had an aura that commanded attention and respect. His tone was enough to stop their bickering, at least for now. Jiraiya smirked, see? Orochimaru said not to cause any trouble. So stop picking fights with me, Tsunade. Tsunade, still seething, looked ready to throw another punch, but she held back, glancing at Orochimaru instead. Orochimaru, sensing the tension, decided to change the subject. Tsunade, Orochimaru said, I have to go see Hiruzen-sensei. Want to come with me? Of course, she replied quickly, seizing the opportunity to leave. The trio set off toward the Hokage's office. When they arrived at the Hokage building, Hiruzen greeted them almost immediately. He had a serious expression on his face. You came at just the right time, Hiruzen said. Based on your good performance in the village, I've decided that it's time for you to be deployed to the front lines. You'll get some real-world experience on the battlefield. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed slightly. Go back and prepare yourselves. We'll be leaving in an hour, added Hiruzen. Orochimaru knew immediately that his plans would have to be postponed. The battlefield awaited. Chapter 25, The First Ninja War, despite being called a war, was more like two villages locked in a prolonged battle of attrition, Konoha versus Kumogakure, and Kirigakure versus Iwagakure. Compared to the large-scale conflicts that would occur in the future, this war was relatively monotonous. Still, the fighting dragged on for years, and Orochimaru couldn't quite understand how these small forces, with only a few thousand on each side, could sustain such a lengthy conflict. Are they really that cautious, dragging things out for years? Orochimaru mused to himself, though he quickly dismissed the thought. It wasn't his place to question the strategies of warlords or generals from centuries past. He originally had plans of his own to exchange a weakened version of the basic gene-enhancing fluid he had recently developed in exchange for Konoha's support in furthering his scientific research. He also had hopes of gaining access to the remains of the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama, whose cells were of great interest to him. But with the sudden arrival of a mission, those plans had to be put on hold. An hour later, fully armed, Orochimaru stood at the entrance of Konoha village alongside Tsunade and Jiraiya. All three were dressed in standard ninja gear, forehead protectors, ninja uniforms, weapon pouches, scrolls, leg wraps, and ninja shoes. This wasn't their first mission, but until now, their tasks had been mundane D-rank missions like picking up garbage, weeding fields, catching cats, and delivering letters. On rare occasions, they had gone on missions outside the village, but those were just to deal with local bandits, hardly a challenge for any of them. In fact, they had never even encountered a true wandering ninja, much less an enemy of notable strength. The bandits they did fight were weak, the kind of scum that even Naruto's shadow clones could defeat in seconds later in the timeline. But this mission was different. When Orochimaru, Tsunade, and Jiraiya arrived at the entrance of Konoha, they found Hiruzen already waiting for them. He, too, was fully armed, wearing black battle armor that gave him a commanding presence. Despite his serious appearance, there was a glint of pride in his eyes as he looked at his three students. Hiruzen couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, especially when it came to Orochimaru. The boy's natural talent and dedication made him a prodigy, one that Hiruzen was proud to call his disciple. "Let's go," Hiruzen said simply. There were no inspiring speeches or fiery words. Just those simple words to kick off the mission. As they traveled, Hiruzen briefed them on the details of the mission. According to his information, the second Hokage, Senju Tobirama, had already returned to the front lines with a force of seasoned ninjas. The enemy cloud ninjas from Kumogakure had begun to retreat. With the most intense fighting over, the battlefield was now less dangerous. Still, Hiruzen wanted his students to experience the reality of war. They were the future of Konoha, and he had a duty to prepare them for what was to come. He wanted them to see firsthand just how brutal the battlefield could be. As they moved swiftly through the forest, the four of them jumped from tree to tree, moving like shadows through the foliage. The scenery on both sides blurred as they sped toward the front lines. "Heh, finally!" Jiraiya said with excitement, barely able to contain himself. "We're going to the battlefield. I bet we're the youngest ones out there, huh?" Indeed, at barely 9 years old, the three of them were quite young to be deployed to a battlefield during the First Ninja World War. However, Orochimaru, who knew the future, couldn't help but think that their age was rather late compared to the standards that would come in future wars. In the original timeline, Uchiha Itachi was brought to the battlefield at the age of 4, and Kakashi graduated from the academy at 5 and became a Chunin at 6, immediately seeing combat. Compared to those prodigies, Orochimaru, Tsunade, and Jiraiya's age didn't seem particularly early at all. The closer they got to the front lines, the more signs of battle they encountered. They arrived at the northeastern defense line of the Land of Fire, and immediately, the devastation of war was apparent. Trees were splintered and swayed ominously, and rocks were shattered into fragments. The ground was littered with kunai, shuriken, and broken ninja swords, signs of the intense battles that had taken place there. If one looked closely, they could even spot corpses that hadn't yet been removed. "This is war," Jiraiya muttered, his voice much quieter now. His earlier excitement was completely gone, replaced by an uneasy silence as he took in the carnage around him. The sight of the corpses, their eyes wide open, their faces twisted in pain, was enough to unsettle even Tsunade. She had trained to become a strong kunoichi, but no amount of training could prepare a person for the horrors of war. Both she and Jiraiya had grown up in a peaceful village, and this was their first real taste of the battlefield. Orochimaru, however, remained calm. Whether it was because of the mental fortitude he had developed in his previous life or because he had mentally prepared himself for what he knew was inevitable, he wasn't shaken by the scene before him. In fact, he felt a strange detachment. This wasn't the first time he had seen death, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. "Be careful," Hiruzen said after checking the condition of the nearest corpse. We're still half a day's journey from the front line, but things can change quickly. The three young ninjas nodded, their senses sharp and alert. They were about to continue when suddenly, whoosh! 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 6 figures appeared out of nowhere, surrounding them. The sound of shuriken cutting through the air filled the clearing. Jiraiya and Tsunade were startled, quickly assuming defensive positions. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes, observing the 6 figures that had surrounded them. He focused on the forehead protectors they wore. One of our own? Orochimaru murmured under his breath. In the chaos of battle, identifying friend from foe was crucial. The forehead protector was the first line of identification. Even if an enemy used transformation jutsu, they wouldn't attack someone wearing the same village's protector unless they were absolutely sure. The leader of the group, a ninja wearing sunglasses, stepped forward. Is that you, Hiruzen-sama? The man asked. Hiruzen smiled slightly. Ah, Aburame Takuya. It's good to see you. Hearing their leader's name called, the other 5 ninjas visibly relaxed. They lowered their weapons and dispersed slightly, allowing the tension in the air to ease. Identity confirmed. Stand down, Takuya ordered his men. Orochimaru, watching all this unfold, realized just how tense and dangerous the battlefield really was. It was much more rigorous than he had imagined. Even in seemingly safe territory, trust was something fragile and easily broken. This was the reality of war, a reality they would soon face firsthand. Chapter 26. The primary function of a forehead protector isn't actually to protect the forehead. Its main use is to distinguish the ninja's allegiance on the battlefield. After all, even within the same village, many ninjas may not know each other personally. And during the chaos of battle, who has time to closely inspect every face? When 2 teams of ninjas encounter each other in the wild, they'll first confirm their allegiances and exchange passcodes to ensure they're on the same side. At this moment, Aburame Takuya heard Hiruzen call his name, instantly reassuring him that this wasn't a trick from the enemy. After all, Takuya was just an ordinary member of the Aburame clan. There's no way the enemy would know his name unless they were intimately familiar with his people. Once the 2 sides confirmed their identities, Hiruzen and Takuya quickly exchanged information before continuing their march towards the front line with Orochimaru and the others. War, it's terrifying. Jiraiya muttered under his breath as they ran. The scene of the blood-soaked battlefield still lingered vividly in his mind. The sheer brutality of what he had witnessed left a deep impression, something that could shock even a seasoned fighter, let alone a child. Jiraiya's mental fortitude was limited. It was his first time seeing the battlefield, and in truth, even many adult ninjas would be scared stiff by such carnage. Tsunade, running beside him, nodded in agreement. Yeah, hearing stories is one thing, but seeing it in person, it's different. War is always like this, Hiruzen said, trying to comfort them. You'll get used to it. He had already witnessed countless similar scenes, and over time, they had dulled his emotions. After reassuring them, Hiruzen's gaze drifted toward Orochimaru. Outwardly, there was no noticeable change in Orochimaru's expression before or after the battle. Was this kid just naturally born to be a ninja? Hiruzen couldn't help but wonder. At the Konoha border, within the military outpost. Oh! Monkey, you've arrived? The second Hokage, clad in blue armor, greeted the 4 as they landed. His expression was serious as he finished preparing his gear. Several prominent Konoha shinobi stood by his side, each a pillar of the village's strength. Among them were the rotund Akimichi Tofu, Uchiha Kagami wearing his clan's emblem, and Danzo, with a noticeable scar etched on his chin. This wasn't Orochimaru's first time seeing these individuals, but he had never been so close to them before. Now that he had a chance to examine them up close, he could feel the immense strength radiating from these veterans. However, it was the second Hokage that stood out the most. Even though he wasn't intentionally exuding his power, Orochimaru could still feel the overwhelming aura he possessed. Hiruzen nodded at his teacher, the second Hokage. Sensei, I've brought them to the battlefield. Before the second Hokage could respond, Danzo interrupted with a sharp retort. Hiruzen, what are you doing bringing children here? Do you know where you are? Though they were teammates, Danzo and Hiruzen were also rivals, locked in a perpetual struggle for dominance. They pushed each other, sometimes out of genuine competition, and sometimes out of mutual animosity. The second Hokage rarely interfered in their squabbles, believing that rivalry bred progress. As for why Danzo was so opposed to the children being here, well, any ninja forced to go to the battlefield at the age of 6 or 7 could understand. It wasn't ideal by any means. If it were up to him, no child would set foot on the battlefield. Is this really Danzo? And now, here they were. Haha, don't worry so much, Danzo, Hiruzen responded with a hearty laugh, a stark contrast to the cold and calculating demeanor of his future self. These kids are more capable than you think. I'm sure nothing will go wrong. Danzo scoffed, clearly unconvinced. You'll regret it when something does happen. Enough, the second Hokage interrupted. What's done is done. Let's focus on the task at hand. His gaze shifted to Orochimaru, who felt the weight of the Hokage's stare. Hiruzen, I'm leading the main force to strike at their vanguard. You take a team of ANBU and clean up the remaining stragglers. Yes, sir. The ANBU was a specialized unit created under the second Hokage's reign. Their full title was the Assassination and Tactical Special Forces, a team of elite ninja handpicked from the village's finest. Their responsibilities ranged from safeguarding the Hokage and the village from external threats to carrying out high-risk missions such as reconnaissance and assassination. The tasks were often dangerous, and sometimes mundane, such as guarding high-priority captives. Due to the sensitive nature of their missions, ANBU members always operated wearing white animal masks to conceal their identities, with all mission details kept highly classified. The ANBU reported directly to the Hokage, and orders were issued through the squad leader, who would then lead the team to execute their objectives. For now, Hiruzen had been temporarily entrusted with command over one such 5-man ANBU squad. The team, all clad in dark uniforms and animal masks, consisted of 4 men and 1 woman. Including Hiruzen and Orochimaru, the group now totaled 9. Their mission was to locate and eliminate Kumo ninjas, who, like themselves, were operating in small tactical squads. Hiruzen-sama, one of the masked ANBUs, spoke up hesitantly. Are you sure bringing these children along is a wise decision? Chapter 27, Hiruzen-sama, are you sure it's a wise decision to bring these children here? As they moved stealthily through the dense jungle, one of the ANBU members glanced over at Orochimaru and the others, his voice full of doubt. The ANBU squad was directly affiliated with the Hokage and usually handled highly specialized tasks, so they didn't often cross paths with others. They knew of Tsunade being a member of the prestigious Senju clan, but they had no idea who Jiraiya and Orochimaru were. On the battlefield, age wasn't the only concern. What truly mattered was whether someone had the strength to hold their own in a fight. Would these children be able to keep up, or worse, would they become liabilities in the heat of battle? Tsunade, being a Senju and a direct descendant of both the first and second Hokage, was an exception. Even if her strength wasn't fully developed, no one could completely disregard her potential. But Jiraiya and Orochimaru? They were clearly from civilian backgrounds. How much combat ability could children of commoners really possess? Eagle, don't underestimate them, Sarutobi Hiruzen said with a slight smile, understanding the ANBU captain's skepticism. If a fight breaks out, you might be surprised. You could end up being no match for them. ANBU members each had code names, and this captain's was Eagle. Eagle's eyes narrowed in dissatisfaction at Sarutobi's words. With all due respect, Hiruzen-sama, I know they're your disciples, but don't you think that's a bit much? That's right, they're just kids, one of the other ANBU chimed in. I mean, it's not like they've seen real battle yet, another added. Several ANBU members immediately voiced their agreement, their dismissive tones making it clear they didn't think much of Jiraiya and Orochimaru. After all, no matter how talented these two civilian children might be, what could they really do at just 8 years old? Even prodigies from prominent clans wouldn't be expected to match the skills of trained ANBU members. To them, it was laughable that these kids were even here. Sarutobi, however, only chuckled lightly. Eagle, Fox. After all your years as ninja, surely you've realized by now that geniuses do exist in this world, right? Geniuses? Eagle scoffed, his skepticism palpable. Maybe, but no matter how much talent they have, there's still a limit to what children can do. They can't be that powerful. Isn't that the truth? Another ANBU muttered in agreement. Before the conversation could continue, Tsunade and Jiraiya, having overheard everything, couldn't hold back their frustration any longer. Hey, uncles from ANBU, don't look down on us like that. Jiraiya snapped. That's right. We're stronger than you think. Tsunade added, her eyes narrowing in defiance. The three young ninjas had always been exceptionally talented. Even though they were still young, their skills already surpassed many of their peers. In fact, they had the raw potential to surpass many experienced chunin. For context, chunin were the most common rank of ninja in every village. Even among the ANBU, there were numerous standout chunin. Sarutobi's claim wasn't an exaggeration. The only thing these three lacked was experience in real battlefield conditions. Haha, the kids sure are confident, aren't they? One of the ANBU said with a mocking grin. Yeah, let's see if they're still so bold when they're face to face with an enemy. Hope they don't whip their pants, another laughed. Ha ha ha. You. Before Tsunade could fire back, Orochimaru, who had remained quiet up to this point, suddenly interrupted in a cold, calm voice. Everyone, stop. There are enemies ahead. At once, the entire group went silent, and all eyes turned to Orochimaru. Even Hiruzen was surprised. Sarutobi raised his hand, signaling everyone to halt. Orochimaru, what is it? There are enemies up ahead, Orochimaru repeated, his voice steady. One of the female ANBU, the squad's designated sensory ninja, was visibly confused. Enemies? Kid, don't make things up. I'm the censor here, and I haven't sensed any weight. She froze mid-sentence as her expression changed. Oh no! There are enemies. Everyone, get ready! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! In an instant, the group of 9 turned into blurs, swiftly moving to find cover amidst the thick foliage. As they settled into their positions, hidden behind trees and rocks, many of the ANBU cast sidelong glances at Orochimaru, their expressions no longer filled with skepticism but rather with a glint of recognition. Hiruzen, Tsunade, and Jiraiya were less surprised, knowing that Orochimaru possessed an innate sense for danger, but the ANBU members were dumbstruck. Is this kid also a sensory type? One of them muttered, his voice full of admiration. The female ANBU censor, codenamed Nightingale, was particularly stunned. She prided herself on her perceptive abilities. While not the strongest censor in the village, she was skilled enough to be placed in ANBU. Yet, this young boy had detected the enemy before she had? Did that mean Orochimaru's perception abilities were stronger than hers? However, what none of them knew was that Orochimaru's actions weren't entirely due to his natural talent. He had secretly employed a technique of his own, a small swarm of nearly invisible flies, part of a technology unique to him. He had released them ahead of the group to scout for any potential threats in the dense forest. In a war zone, where enemy ambushes could occur at any moment, vigilance was key. While the rest of the group had to rely on their senses, Orochimaru's flies could move faster and detect enemies far ahead. That's how he had managed to pinpoint the enemy's location before even Nightingale could. Swish! Before anyone could dwell too long on the matter, 3 figures suddenly appeared from the trees ahead, dashing through the undergrowth. As they stepped into view, the sunlight glinted off the metal of their forehead protectors, which bore the unmistakable symbol of the village hidden in the clouds, Kumo-Vikure. Chapter 28, Konoha Border, Kumo Ninja Village Defense Line. In the dense jungle, a group of about a dozen swift and agile figures darted through the undergrowth with practiced ease. Among the group, Both men and women were easily recognizable by their dark skin and the sophisticated ninja swords strapped to their backs. Their attire and demeanor marked them as the elites of the Kumo Ninja Village. "Damn it, what is the Raikage thinking, compromising with Konoha like this?" one of the men suddenly grumbled, his tone dripping with dissatisfaction. Judging by his voice, it was clear that he was not pleased with their leader's decision. Exactly. After all this time and fighting, how can a mere agreement erase the hatred between us? I agree. Those Konoha ninjas deserve to die, another added angrily, his voice full of venom. Several other ninjas in the team nodded in agreement, their expressions dark. Enough. The man leading the group, a ninja named Shai, interrupted with a stern voice. I know some of you lost family to Konoha, but Raikage-sama gave us orders, and we must follow them. TCH, I know, one of them grumbled, but before we leave, we're going to have one last bit of fun on this battlefield. That's right. We can at least kill a few more Konoha dogs before we retreat. Exactly. I hope we meet some. Hold on! Shai, now crouched on a tree branch, raised his hand abruptly, signaling the group to stop. Everyone immediately halted in their tracks, their movements disciplined and silent. What's wrong, Captain Shai? One of the ninjas behind him asked. With a wicked grin, Shai responded, it seems we found ourselves a little mouse. Oh? The ninja who had spoken returned the grin. Kai, sense anything? The ninja named Kai, a wiry man, nodded and knelt to the ground, placing 2 fingers lightly on the soil. He closed his eyes, concentrating deeply. How many can you sense? Shai asked, his voice tense with anticipation. 9 people, Kai answered confidently, his eyes still closed. It was clear that Kai was the team's sensory ninja, and in the dense forest where visibility was limited, it was often these perception-based abilities that determined victory in battle. By identifying the number and positioning of enemies, a proper strategy could be devised. Only 9? Shai smirked, glancing at his own group of 12. Seems like we've got the advantage. I'll take 2 of you with me to lure them out. The rest of you, lie and wait for the right moment to strike. Understood. Whoosh! Ding ding ding! 3 Kumo ninjas appeared in the clearing, and Konoha's group immediately launched an attack. Several shurikens were hurled in quick succession. The 3 Cloud ninjas, who had anticipated the ambush, easily deflected the projectiles. Ha! You Konoha cowards, come out and fight us, one of the Kumo ninjas shouted mockingly, his voice full of contempt. Ha ha ha, did you really think you could ambush us? As they taunted their enemies, the Kumo ninjas skillfully dodged the attacks while throwing kunai equipped with explosive tags in return. Boom! The explosions rocked the Konoha team's hiding spots. Hiruzen, watching the unfolding chaos, narrowed his eyes. Their sensory ninja is quite skilled. Eagle, stall them for as long as you can. Understood, the ANBU ninja known as Eagle responded. He quickly formed hand seals and slammed his hands to the ground. Earth release, rock attack. Immediately, sharp, jagged rocks shot up from the earth, hurtling toward the Kumo ninjas like a volley of bullets. Hiruzen glanced back at his 3 young students. Orochimaru, Tsunade, Jiraiya, just fight as you normally would, but be cautious. Got it, all 3 responded in unison. Hiruzen then turned to the rest of the group. Everyone else, come with me to engage the enemy. Yes, sir. In a flash, Hiruzen's form blurred into an afterimage as he led the charge toward the battlefield. The battle began in earnest, and chaos erupted as every Konoha ninja found themselves face to face with an opponent. Hiruzen himself was quickly engaged by 3 Kumo ninjas, their combined attacks forcing him to stay on the defensive. Meanwhile, Jiraiya watched the scene unfold, his eyes wide with fear. He swallowed hard, clearly unnerved by the intensity of the battle. Just as he was about to speak, Orochimaru grabbed him by the collar and yanked him forward. Stop daydreaming, Orochimaru's cold voice cut through the noise as he dragged Jiraiya to safety. Boom! A massive explosion rocked the ground right where Jiraiya had been standing just moments ago. That was close. Jiraiya gasped, clutching his chest in relief. He was about to thank Orochimaru when... Whoosh whoosh whoosh! 3 Kumo ninjas suddenly landed in front of the trio, 2 men and 1 woman. Oh! What do we have here? Just 3 little brats, one of the men sneered. Ha ha ha, shouldn't kids your age still be sucking at their mother's tits? The other man mocked. The female ninja, however, was less amused. Quit fooling around. They may be kids, but they're still our enemies. Let's finish this quickly. On the battlefield, age didn't matter. If you wore the forehead protector of the enemy, you were a target to be eliminated. With a cold smile, the female ninja drew her sword and leapt into the air, shouting, "Since you're here on the battlefield, don't blame me for being ruthless. Die, little brats." Her blade glinted under the sunlight as she performed a powerful move, cloud-style, crescent moon slash. Whoosh! The crescent-shaped sword energy sliced through the air, speeding mercilessly toward Orochimaru and the others. The Kumo ninjas, well-versed in close combat and known for their mastery of lightning-based jutsu and sword techniques, believed that once they closed the distance, victory was assured. Most Konoha ninjas were weaker in melee combat, and only the Uchiha and Hyuga clans had the power to reliably counter such direct attacks. For these 3 Kumo ninjas, it seemed like an easy win. Clang! The sound of metal clashing rang out as the female ninja's attack was blocked. Her eyes widened in shock. What? Blocked? By this brat? Nanny. Orochimaru, his face expressionless, had intercepted the strike with his own blade. Without a word, his left sleeve suddenly burst open, and countless snakes shot out from his arm. Hidden Shadow Snake Hands. The snakes lunged at the Kumo ninjas with terrifying speed. Jiraiya! Orochimaru shouted. Got it! Jiraiya finally snapped out of his daze, quickly forming hand seals. Ninja Art, Needle Jizo. Spikes of hardened hair shot out from Jiraiya's head, creating a defensive barrier as sharp as steel. Watch out, one of the Kumo ninjas yelled. But before they could react, Tsunade, with a battle cry, charged forward and slammed her fist into the ground. Boom! The earth cracked under her punch, sending tremors rippling through the battlefield. Amidst the chaos, one of the Kumo ninjas shouted, "Your opponent is me. Let's see if you can survive this." Chapter 29, Hidden Shadow Snake Hands. This was Orochimaru's signature technique. After receiving the summoning jutsu 2 years ago, Orochimaru had developed this technique as an extension of it. For him, learning ninjutsu had become far easier compared to the complex process of scientific research. Scientific projects, even the simplest ones, could take anywhere from half a year to a couple of years to complete. Even with his expertise in creating genetic enhancement serums, it still took him 2 months to develop the genetic repair fluid he had been working on. But ninjutsu? That was a different story. The principles behind most ninjutsu, excluding secret techniques and Kekkei Genkai, bloodline limits, were relatively straightforward. With a teacher to guide him, Orochimaru could learn new techniques in a day, maybe 2 at most. Even without a teacher, if he studied a technique independently, it rarely took more than 3 days. Hidden Shadow Snake Hands was a summoning-based ninjutsu. Orochimaru, with his vast intellect, had taken just 3 days to create the technique using necromancy principles and his extensive knowledge of summoning. While this technique might not have seemed overwhelmingly powerful in the grand scope of things, and it was rarely lethal in the original works, its true value lay in its utility. The countless snakes that erupted from Orochimaru's arm each served a distinct purpose: intimidation, binding, and capturing. The best part? The jutsu required no hand seals, making it incredibly convenient and fast to execute. Unless you were a speed-type ninja, dodging this technique was nearly impossible. At this moment, the female Kumonin was no slouch. She wasn't slow and hadn't underestimated her opponents, but she never anticipated that Orochimaru would be able to block her swift sword strike with just a kunai. Even more, she never expected Orochimaru to attack her with such an unusual method. She was completely caught off guard. The moment her sword was parried by Orochimaru's kunai, the serpents from his sleeves lunged at her, biting and constricting her. In that instant, she realized something was terribly wrong, but it was already too late. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. From Jiraiya's head and body, countless white strands of hair shot out like needles, sharp and dense as rainfall. The female Kumo ninja, trapped by Orochimaru's serpents, had no time to evade. The white hair needles, with their immense penetrating power, tore through the air toward her. She tried to struggle, but Orochimaru's snakes had her completely bound. She couldn't move. Unlike Tsunade and Sakura, who possessed monstrous strength, most ninjas couldn't break free from such a tight bind. Her teammates saw her predicament and tried to rush to her aid, but Tsunade blocked their path with a devastating punch to the ground. Boom! The earth shattered under her fist, sending chunks of rock flying in all directions. Puff puff puff. Almost simultaneously, Jiraiya's needle Jizo rained down upon the female Kumo ninja, turning her into a bloody pincushion. She didn't even have time to scream before she was reduced to a lifeless husk. Damn it! These brats! The two remaining Kumo ninjas were enraged. They had underestimated these kids, thinking the battle would be a simple task. They never imagined that one of their own would be killed so swiftly. Bastards, Iru! What's happening over there? The Kumo captain, Shai, heard the death cry of his comrade from across the battlefield. Mid-fight, he called out angrily, trying to make sense of how one of his adult ninja had been taken down by mere children. They hadn't even decided the outcome of their own fight yet, and these kids were already handling their side of the battle? It didn't make sense. He needed answers. Iru, one of the remaining Kumo ninjas, grit his teeth in frustration and fury. These aren't ordinary brats. Damn it, I'm going to kill them. His voice was filled with rage and disbelief. Both Iru and his remaining teammate gripped their ninja swords tightly, their eyes locked on the three young Konoha ninjas in front of them. They could no longer afford to underestimate these kids. They had to avenge their fallen comrade. At the same time, Orochimaru calmly observed the situation. His eyes flickered toward his kunai, which now had a noticeable chip in its blade from blocking the enemy's attack. He was impressed by the sharpness of the Kumo ninja's sword. Glancing at Jiraiya, who was still frozen in shock, Orochimaru's frown deepened. Jiraiya, what's wrong with you? Orochimaru asked, his voice sharp with irritation. Jiraiya, pale and trembling, muttered, Did I really kill someone? He was only 8 years old. Up until now, the missions they had been assigned merely involved subduing or capturing enemies. Never before had Jiraiya taken a life. The realization that he had just killed someone for the first time sent a chill down his spine, shaking his young heart to the core. Orochimaru, on the other hand, was unfazed. It was his first time experiencing this, too, but unlike Jiraiya, the act of killing didn't disturb him. If anything, he felt a strange excitement, as if something inside him had been unleashed. The hatred, the frustration he carried, it had found an outlet, and killing the enemy only amplified that feeling. What of it? Orochimaru said coldly, his voice devoid of sympathy. If you don't kill them, they'll kill you. Didn't you undergo mental training for this? Tsunade, though slightly more compassionate than Orochimaru, was also quick to snap Jiraiya out of his shock. Jiraiya, now's not the time to hesitate. This is war. Growing up in the Senju clan, where generations of warriors had fought and died, Tsunade had come to terms with the harsh realities of battle faster than Jiraiya. She knew that mercy and hesitation could be fatal on the battlefield. But, Jiraiya stammered, still struggling with his conscience. There's no but. They're coming. Orochimaru interrupted harshly. The two remaining Kumo ninjas, enraged by their comrade's death, were already charging at them with their swords drawn, ready for revenge. The three young Konoha ninjas quickly fell back, trying to maintain some distance as the Kumo ninjas pressed forward. Meanwhile, the battle around them was becoming more intense. Elsewhere on the battlefield, other ninjas were beginning to suffer casualties. Earth release, earth flow river. The ground beneath one of the Kumo ninjas suddenly turned soft and slippery, forming a river of mud that dragged him down. Before he could react, his legs were caught in the mire, making it impossible for him to escape. Cloud style, downward slash. In another part of the battlefield, a Konoha Anbu ninja was struck by a Kumo ninja's blade, a deep gash opening across his chest. Blood splattered as the ninja grunted in pain, stumbling backward. Shuriken, kunai, and explosive tags flew through the air, detonating across the forest as the sounds of battle filled the entire area. Hiruzen, after quickly dispatching one of the Kumo ninjas, glanced over at the three children who were still engaged in a fierce fight with their opponents. His eyes narrowed with concern as he noticed that the two remaining Kumo ninjas seemed to be gaining the upper hand. Orochimaru. Now's your chance, use it. He shouted, signaling to his student. Orochimaru's eyes gleamed with understanding. Without hesitation, he flicked his wrist, pulling out a kunai with an explosive tag attached to it and hurling it toward the enemy. Boom! The explosion forced the two Kumo ninjas to retreat, momentarily creating a gap between them and the young Konoha ninjas. Whoosh whoosh whoosh! Orochimaru, Tsunade, and Jiraiya immediately regrouped, standing back to back. Without a word, they bit their thumbs, drawing blood, and began forming hand seals in perfect synchrony. Boar dog bird monkey ram. Summoning jutsu. In unison, they slammed their palms onto the ground. Bang! 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 Three enormous clouds of white smoke exploded from the ground, billowing up and covering the battlefield. As the smoke quickly dissipated, three gigantic summons appeared in front of the stunned enemies. But that wasn't all, there was a fourth summon. Standing tall beside the three young summons was Hiruzen's own summon, the powerful Monkey King Enma. The Kumo ninjas stared in disbelief as the massive creatures loomed before them. Orochimaru's massive snake, Jiraiya's toad, Tsunade's slug, and Sarutobi's Monkey King were now all on the battlefield. TCH. Damn it, one of the Kumo ninjas cursed under his breath. He knew the tide of battle had shifted dramatically. These were no ordinary brats, they were clearly prodigies trained by one of the greatest ninjas in Konoha. The odds of winning had just plummeted. Get ready! Shy, still locked in combat, Hiruzen shouted to his team. We can't back down now. With their summons backing them, Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and Tsunade prepared for the next phase of the battle. The real fight was about to begin, and this time, the Kumo ninjas were up against forces far beyond what they had anticipated. With a confident smirk, Orochimaru gripped his kunai tighter, his cold eyes fixed on the enemy. Let's finish this. Chapter 30, Summon Beasts. These kids are incredible. Amazing. The Konoha Anbu, though fully engaged in their own battles, couldn't help but notice out of the corner of their eyes the massive figures that appeared alongside the young Sannin. Their hearts swelled with admiration for the three children they had previously doubted. At this moment, they finally recognized the strength and potential of Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and Tsunade. After all, not every ninja had the ability to summon ninja beasts. And having a combat-ready summon on the battlefield significantly enhanced a ninja's strength, especially in prolonged engagements. The ANBU knew this all too well from their own experiences. Hateful. The Kumo ninjas, once filled with confidence, now stood frozen, gripping their swords tightly, their faces filled with terror as they looked up at the three ninja beasts summoned by the Konoha brats. Two of the summoned creatures, a toad and a slug, didn't appear particularly threatening at first glance. The slug seemed passive, and the toad didn't look like much of a fighter either. But the enormous flower-patterned python? It radiated menace, its thick body coiled and ready to strike, and its sharp eyes gleamed dangerously. Tsunade-sama. The voice of the slug, Katsuyu, was soft and melodic, instantly calming anyone who heard it. Jiraiya's summon, a small toad, sighed deeply before speaking. Jiraiya, I was enjoying some peace and quiet, and you call me out now? TCH, wait, have you brought me to a battlefield? As soon as the summoned beasts appeared, they immediately spoke to their summoners. However, Orochimaru's python said nothing aloud, simply hissing in anticipation. Deep within Orochimaru's mind, the serpent's voice slithered into his thoughts, acknowledging him, Master. Before Orochimaru's defection, the bonds between the three young ninjas were truly remarkable. Even Orochimaru, who rarely showed much sentimentality, couldn't help but feel a tinge of nostalgia and camaraderie as he stood with his teammates. For 2 years now, under the guidance of Sarutobi Hiruzen, the three of them had trained side by side, building not just strength but mutual trust. Their teamwork had only grown stronger. The Hidden Shadow Snake Hands combined with Jiraiya's Needle Jizo, for example, was a deadly combination they had perfected through practice. The synchronization they had with their summoned beasts was no different. Signing a blood contract was the key to summoning beasts, and the size and power of the summoned creature often depended on the chakra capacity of the ninja. Tsunade's slug, Katsuyu, could adjust her size depending on the amount of chakra Tsunade poured into the summoning. Similarly, Orochimaru's snakes and Jiraiya's toads would vary in species and strength according to the chakra available. At the tender age of 8, the Sannin still had limited chakra reserves. Consequently, the summoned beasts they summoned weren't as large as the ones they would summon in the future. Currently, Tsunade's slug and Jiraiya's toad were only slightly taller than an adult human. Orochimaru's summoned snake, while formidable, was about 7 to 8 meters long, its body thicker than a grown man's thigh. That being said, Orochimaru had already taken intermediate gene enhancement serum, which had doubled his chakra capacity over the past 2 years. His real strength far surpassed what he was showing now. However, to keep pace with Tsunade and Jiraiya, he had opted for a smaller summon, knowing that summoning a larger snake might create unnecessary complications. In truth, Orochimaru had to be cautious when summoning snakes, especially when it came to summoning the largest and most dangerous one, Manda. Unlike the other summoned creatures, the snakes from Ryuchi Cave were notoriously vicious and independent. Even Manda, who had intelligence far beyond an ordinary beast, was cruel, cold-blooded, and often defiant. If Orochimaru ever summoned Manda, he would likely need to wrestle with the snake to establish control. At this stage, that wasn't necessary, nor did Orochimaru have the time or inclination to deal with such a rebellious creature. Returning to the battle at hand, the Kumo ninjas who once held the advantage in numbers now found themselves evenly matched. Worse yet, they had underestimated Sarutobi Hiruzen and, by extension, his students. Hiruzen had already eliminated one enemy ninja, and the young Sannin trio had quickly dispatched another with their surprise attack. Now, the Kumo ninjas had only one extra member on their side. But as soon as the 4 summoned beasts appeared, their numerical advantage vanished. Hiruzen Monkey King Enma, in particular, struck fear into the hearts of the remaining Kumo ninjas. Enma was a nightmare for anyone who faced him in battle. His immense strength and sharp claws could tear through even the strongest defenses and, as the Kumo ninjas quickly learned, he could grab their ninja swords directly with his powerful hands. Ding ding! Bang bang! Tsunade, get out of the way! Orochimaru shouted. Got it! Tsunade responded instantly, pushing off the ground with her toes and leaping back gracefully, giving Orochimaru and Jiraiya space to move. The two boys quickly formed hand seals, preparing to launch a combined attack on the Kumo ninjas now entangled with the summoned beasts. Fire release, flame bullet. Wind release, great breakthrough. Fire and wind combined in perfect harmony, the wind fanning the flames into a massive inferno that surged toward the remaining Kumo ninja. Whoosh! The fire roared across the battlefield like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Within moments, screams echoed from the flames as the Kumo ninjas were caught in the searing heat. Shuriken, kunai, explosive tags, and the roars of summoned beasts filled the battlefield with a cacophony of sound and fury. The overwhelming difference in power between the Konoha ninjas and their Kumo opponents became painfully clear as the fight drew to a close. White-haired ape. Damn it. You're Hiruzen Sarutobi. The Kumo Jonin Shai, after witnessing the white-haired furred monkey king Inma and recognizing Hiruzen's combat prowess, finally realized who he was up against. His voice trembled with anger and fear. The image of Hiruzen had been imprinted deeply into the minds of the Kumo ninjas from previous battles. But it wasn't just Hiruzen himself, it was the fearsome white-haired ape that haunted them most. Hiruzen, his face calm but resolute, glanced at the remaining Kumo ninjas and spoke softly, "This war should have ended long ago. Why are you still so stubborn?" "Ended?" Shai's voice cracked with bitter laughter. "You're so naive. Die!" With a roar of desperation, Shai gripped his sword and rushed at Hiruzen once more. He knew full well that he was no match for the man in front of him. But retreat was not an option. Looking around at the bodies of his fallen comrades, Shai realized that the miscalculations he had made in underestimating Hiruzen and his students had cost his entire team their lives. What would be the point of returning now? He had nothing left, no teammates, no family. Rather than continue living with the shame of his failure, it was better to die here, on the battlefield. He had made peace with his fate. Ninjas should die on the battlefield. With a single swift motion, Hiruzen's kunai pierced Shai's heart from behind, gleaming with cold finality as it delivered the killing blow. The battle was over. Chapter 31, Bang, Bang, Bang. As the last Kumo ninja hit the ground, the four summoned beasts disappeared in clouds of white smoke, leaving the battlefield eerily silent once again. The once tranquil forest was now a chaotic mess, the earth torn and scarred, trees uprooted, and the ground littered with debris, an all-too-familiar scene in the aftermath of a battle. The Konoha ANBU quickly moved in to assess the battlefield, checking for any signs of lingering danger. "You kids did an amazing job," one of the ANBU members approached the trio, his voice filled with admiration. To think that these were just children who had shown such combat proficiency and teamwork on their first real battlefield experience. It was simply unbelievable. "Orochimaru, Jiraiya, Tsunade, you really are something special." No way." Jiraiya stammered awkwardly, his face flushed with embarrassment. Tsunade and Orochimaru handled the compliment calmly, but Jiraiya couldn't help feeling ashamed. He had panicked the most during the battle. If Orochimaru hadn't been there to pull him out of danger, he likely would have been seriously injured or worse. Still, Jiraiya was no coward. He had managed to hold his ground after that initial panic, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still lagging behind his teammates. Meanwhile, Orochimaru ignored the praise and the small talk. His gaze shifted to the Kumo ninjas who had been incapacitated but were still alive, groaning on the ground. A strange, inexplicable feeling surged within him. He gripped his kunai tightly and began walking toward the injured Kumo ninjas. "Hey, Orochimaru! What are you doing?" Jiraiya shouted, his voice laced with concern. Thud! Without answering, Orochimaru slashed one of the downed Kumo ninjas across the neck, blood spilling out as the enemy ninja's life quickly faded away. Jiraiya's eyes widened in shock. Tsunade also flinched, a trace of unease flickering across her face. This was different. Although they were enemies, these Kumo ninjas had already lost the ability to fight. Was there really a need to kill them in cold blood? Hiruzen, watching from a distance, noticed Orochimaru's actions. He raised an eyebrow, momentarily surprised, but quickly returned to his usual expression. This was war, after all. Such actions weren't uncommon. Only the ANBU captain, Eagle, showed a more pronounced reaction. Behind his mask, a cold smirk formed. "This kid, he's perfect for ANBU." Shaking his head, Eagle called over one of his uninjured subordinates. Together, they moved across the battlefield, mercilessly finishing off the rest of the incapacitated Kumo ninjas. It was ANBU's job to clean up loose ends, and this was no different. Hiruzen didn't stop them. He wasn't soft-hearted as the future might suggest. During his prime, Hiruzen was an elite jonin, having killed countless enemies. Sparing incapacitated foes? That was simply not an option in war. They couldn't afford to let any enemies escape or report back. However, for Tsunade and Jiraiya, witnessing ANBU's clinical efficiency and cold execution was a sobering moment. It was as if the reality of what it truly meant to be a ninja had finally sunk in. So, this is what it means to be a real ninja, Jiraiya muttered to himself. Once the battlefield was cleared, Eagle approached Hiruzen to report, "What are the casualties?" "One seriously injured, two slightly injured," Eagle replied crisply. "No deaths." Hiruzen frowned slightly. "A serious injury?" "Tsunade." "Yes, sensei." Tsunade immediately stepped forward, understanding what Sarutobi wanted without needing further instruction. "Check the injured," Hiruzen ordered. "Understood." Tsunade nodded before quickly moving to where the seriously injured ANBU member, Fox, lay. The last 2.5 years had been a period of intense growth for the three young ninjas. After graduating, they spent the first half of that time mastering fundamental skills, but the next 2 years had been different. Each of them had begun developing specialized talents. Orochimaru delved deep into scientific research and experiments, Jiraiya trained in senjutsu, and Tsunade honed her skills in medical ninjutsu. Success wasn't just about talent, it was about hard work and dedication. And the three of them embodied this perfectly. That's why they had already begun to rise above their peers. Fox's injury was severe. His chest had been slashed by a Kumo ninja, and the cut was so deep that his ribs were visible. Blood poured from the wound, and it was clear that his condition was critical. Eagle watched Tsunade work with efficient precision, his admiration for the young kunoichi growing with every passing moment. She's a medical ninja? And she's also this strong in combat, another ANBU murmured in disbelief. It was incredibly rare, almost unheard of, for a medical ninja to be so proficient in battle. Medical ninjutsu was still a relatively underdeveloped field in most villages, and Tsunade was clearly breaking new ground with her skill set. Tsunade ignored their comments, focusing entirely on her task. She quickly assessed Fox's condition and frowned. "His wound is extremely deep. He needs surgery right away." "Surgery? Can you do it here?" Eagle asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "It's difficult, but I'll do my best," Tsunade replied, her voice steady. "Then hurry! We don't have much time," Hiruzen urged. As Tsunade readied her tools for surgery, Hiruzen ordered the uninjured ANBU to spread out and secure the area. Now, in the middle of the forest clearing, it was just Tsunade, the wounded, and Orochimaru. Jiraiya, standing nearby, watched Orochimaru's calm demeanor and Tsunade's skillful movements. He couldn't help but feel out of place. Both of them had such defined skills, Orochimaru with his cunning intellect and experiments, and Tsunade with her medical expertise. As Tsunade adjusted her breathing and prepared for surgery, she suddenly felt a tap on her shoulder. "Tsunade, give him this, it'll make the operation easier," Orochimaru said, holding a small vial of clear liquid. "Orochimaru? What is this?" Tsunade asked, momentarily startled. "It's a formula that accelerates wound recovery," Orochimaru replied casually, handing her the vial. Tsunade looked at the liquid, unsure for a moment. She trusted Orochimaru, but this wasn't a normal medical item. Still, there was no time to hesitate. The wounded ANBU's life was on the line. "All right," Tsunade said, handing the vial to Fox. "Drink this. It should help." Trusting Orochimaru was second nature to her, just as trusting Hiruzen was. And she had faith that this would work. "Bear with it," she warned Fox as he drank the liquid, her hands immediately returning to her surgical tools, pulling out disinfectants, gauze, and sutures to begin the procedure. While Tsunade worked, Orochimaru observed Fox's wound with keen interest. The gene repair fluid he had given the ANBU member was a product of his experiments, designed to rapidly heal or regenerate damaged cells. It wasn't an expensive concoction, at least, not for Orochimaru. He could even purchase the raw materials separately from his system, depending on the points he accumulated from his research. The fluid wasn't something Orochimaru used often, but this was the perfect chance to test its effects on a seriously injured human subject. Chapter 32, How is this possible? Tsunade stared in shock at the slowly healing wound before her eyes. All she had done was disinfect the area and clean the wound, but now it was visibly healing on its own. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, it was really happening. The vial given by Orochimaru worked wonders. Fox's wound was recovering slowly but surely, and although it wasn't quite as fast as the healing abilities of someone with an immortal body, it was eerily similar to the effect of biting Karen in the original series. Others, hearing Tsunade's exclamation, quickly gathered around. "What's wrong, Tsunade?" "His wound, it's healing on its own." As everyone heard the news and looked closer, they saw it too. The wound was closing up slowly, mending itself. "How is this happening?" "Incredible." The most astonished among them was Hiruzen. His jaw dropped, and he was momentarily speechless. He had only ever witnessed such automatic healing in one other person, the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama. While Fox's healing was slower than Hashirama's, it was still occurring without any external intervention. No surgery, no medical ninjutsu, just the Fox's body healing itself. At this rate, the wound won't even need surgery. Hiruzen thought, unable to hide his amazement. He composed himself and, after understanding the situation, called Orochimaru aside, his voice measured and serious. "Orochimaru, did you really make this?" Hiruzen's tone was unusually careful, as though he was treading on new, unknown ground. His young disciple had consistently impressed him, from graduation until now. Orochimaru's talent in combat, battlefield adaptability, and now, his scientific research abilities, each one was extraordinary. But this? A fluid that could induce healing similar to the first Hokage's fabled regeneration? This was beyond impressive. The first Hokage's power. Hiruzen thought, his mind reeling. Hashirama was called the god of shinobi for a reason. His ability to heal without hand seals, without medical ninjutsu, was a power that no one else had ever been able to replicate. Until now. Could Orochimaru have, at only 8 years old, achieved something even Tobirama, the second Hokage, had never been able to accomplish? "Yes, sensei," Orochimaru replied calmly, his voice betraying none of the emotions he felt inside. While Orochimaru had planned to use his research to gain access to Konoha's experimental labs, this situation presented an unexpected but still favorable outcome. Now that his work had caught the attention of his teacher, Hiruzen, Orochimaru could proceed with his plan without needing to hide anything. "Unbelievable," Hiruzen muttered, his eyes wide with awe. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. It was one thing to be a talented ninja, but Orochimaru's level of excellence bordered on the unnatural. As one of the key leaders of Konoha, he knew that there was a limit to an individual's strength. Even the most powerful ninja had boundaries. But Orochimaru's potential in scientific research could change that. He could drastically alter the balance of power not just in Konoha, but throughout the entire ninja world. If word of Orochimaru's talent in this area reached an enemy nation, or worse, if Orochimaru decided to turn against Konoha, it could lead to disaster. Hiruzen was a wise leader. At this moment, he was already thinking far ahead, weighing the potential risks and benefits of having such a genius in their village. "Eagle, take the 3 of them back to the village," Hiruzen commanded. Having witnessed the healing with his own eyes, Hiruzen's priorities shifted. Originally, he had intended to keep Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and Tsunade on the battlefield to familiarize them with real combat situations. But after what Orochimaru had demonstrated, he couldn't take the risk of leaving him exposed in a dangerous situation. If Orochimaru truly has mastered this kind of healing technology, then his life becomes incredibly important to the village. "Understood, Lord Hiruzen." Eagle, one of Sarutobi's trusted ANBU, nodded without hesitation. He too had seen the healing and understood why Sarutobi was suddenly being cautious. With that, Eagle led Orochimaru and his teammates, Jiraiya and Tsunade, back to Konoha. Jiraiya and Tsunade seemed to realize that something unusual was happening, but they remained silent for the entire trip. Even the battle-hardened coldness Orochimaru had displayed earlier seemed to fade from their minds, replaced by a newfound respect for his abilities. 3 days later, the group arrived back in Konoha. As soon as they returned, Eagle turned around and headed straight back to the front lines, leaving the 3 young ninjas with some unexpected downtime. Orochimaru, for his part, took the opportunity to rest. After all, he had plans to push forward as soon as Konoha's higher-ups returned from the battlefield. The next morning, he found himself reclining on a large tree branch, staring up at the sunlight filtering through the leaves. The peace of Konoha was a stark contrast to the battlefield they had just left, and for a moment, Orochimaru allowed himself to relax. Next to him, a massive python coiled lazily on the branch. Orochimaru didn't even glance at it. The snake had been raised by his parents, so its presence didn't bother him in the slightest. If I can gain access to Konoha's high-level experimental labs, I should have a chance to come into contact with the first Hokage's cells. Orochimaru mused. According to his memories, he would eventually have access to those cells, but that would take years if he followed the normal course of events. He needed to accelerate his timeline if he wanted to start experimenting on Senju Hashirama's cells sooner. This was precisely why he had revealed his research results to Hiruzen. It was a calculated move to earn the trust and interest of Konoha's top brass. Orochimaru. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Turning his head, Orochimaru saw Tsunade standing beneath the tree, blinking up at him. "What's up?" he asked, his tone neutral. It's nothing, really. I just heard there's a new barbecue restaurant at the end of the village. Do you want to check it out?" Tsunade was still clearly in awe of the gene repair fluid, even though her expertise in medical ninjutsu was different from Orochimaru's scientific research. She understood just how significant that fluid was. Although she had come to discuss its implications further, she decided to soften her approach by suggesting a casual meal first. Orochimaru smirked and jumped down from the tree. "Sure, why not? Wait for me." Tsunade hurried to catch up with him. As the two walked away, the massive flower-patterned python that had been lounging on the tree branch vanished into a puff of white smoke, disappearing from sight. Chapter 33, Orochimaru's straightforward demeanor made Tsunade feel a bit uneasy, but she quickly brushed it off and caught up with him. At the new barbecue restaurant, the food was mouth-wateringly delicious. The tender, juicy meat was a welcome change from the battlefield rations they had eaten over the past 10 days. Even Orochimaru, usually composed and reserved, found himself indulging, his appetite larger than usual. After all, they had been out in the field for quite some time, moving between the battlefield and the search party. Good food like this was a rarity when you were fighting for your life. "This is so good," Tsunade said between bites, clearly enjoying herself. "I wonder where Jiraiya's run off to. If he were here, we could all enjoy this together." Orochimaru smiled for the first time in a while, a rare sight. Noticing his smile, Tsunade paused and blinked at him, feeling a bit flustered. Why are you smiling?" Orochimaru didn't respond immediately, and when he did, his tone was casual. "Nothing." Orochimaru's smile was a rare occurrence. In the 2 years they had known each other, Tsunade could count the number of times she had seen him smile on one hand. For some reason, Orochimaru continued, "Seeing you eat like this brings a sense of calm to me." Tsunade was taken aback by his words, her cheeks reddening slightly. "Why are you so weird?" she muttered, feeling awkward. But she quickly shrugged it off and resumed devouring her food with gusto. Though Orochimaru enjoyed the peaceful moment, he had larger plans in motion. He needed to get Konoha's attention, specifically the attention of its higher-ups, so he could gain access to the village's research facilities and resources. If he could position himself as an invaluable asset in scientific research, they would have no choice but to grant him access to the materials he needed. And from there, everything he wanted would be within his grasp. However, for the moment, the village's leaders, including the second Hokage, were still out on the front lines. Orochimaru would have to be patient and wait for their return before he could make his move. But to his surprise, that wait turned into a month. One morning, While conducting a new experiment in his makeshift lab at home, Orochimaru was deep in concentration. Tsunade, fascinated by his work, sat nearby, watching closely. Ever since she had learned about Orochimaru's ability to create what she and Jiraiya had started calling the Super Recovery Potion, her respect for him had grown immensely. Even Jiraiya, who loved to argue and bicker, had been awestruck by Orochimaru's scientific prowess. Though Jiraiya lacked any talent or interest in medical research, he had come to admire Orochimaru's abilities. That said, his fascination with Orochimaru's research hadn't distracted him from his training. Jiraiya spent most of his time training or traveling back and forth between Konoha and Mount Myaboku, the land of the toads. Tsunade, on the other hand, was different. She had a natural affinity for medicine and healing. It was clear that she was destined to become Konoha's greatest medical nin, though at this stage, she was still just a curious student. She was utterly captivated by Orochimaru's research, particularly his gene enhancement and healing experiments. Orochimaru, do you think this herb could be substituted with a different one? Tsunade asked, crouching down and pointing to some green leaves simmering quietly in a beaker. Of course, Orochimaru replied, nodding slightly. While the potency might be a little weaker, the overall effect would remain the same. Tsunade's eyes widened in admiration. Wow, you're so knowledgeable. Even better than the director at the hospital. Orochimaru couldn't help but smile wryly. It's just different fields of expertise, Tsunade. Well, I still think you're amazing, Tsunade said, eyes gleaming with genuine admiration. Before Orochimaru could respond, the sound of commotion from outside interrupted them. What's going on? Orochimaru muttered. Tsunade, equally curious, jumped to her feet and dashed outside to investigate. It didn't take long for her to piece together what had happened. The war had ended, and Konoha had emerged victorious. The village's ninja forces were returning, and the villagers had organized a large-scale welcoming ceremony for them. Konoha's streets were now filled with returning shinobi, greeted by their emotional families. Many families embraced their loved ones, their tears falling freely, overwhelmed with joy and relief. But not everyone was so lucky. For some, their family members had returned in body bags, leading to a different kind of tear-filled reunion, one filled with sorrow and heartbreak. Even though Konoha had won the battle, war was always accompanied by pain and loss. Tsunade watched the scene, a complicated expression on her face. It's strange, she murmured. Even after a victory, it still feels so sad. Orochimaru, who had followed her outside, stood next to her. This kind of war will go on for many years. You'll get used to it. Tsunade looked up at him, her brow furrowed. Will it really last for many more years? Orochimaru nodded without hesitation. Of course. You didn't think that the end of this war would suddenly bring peace to the world, did you? He spoke with such calm certainty, but the truth in his words weighed heavily on Tsunade. In his mind, Orochimaru could already picture the endless conflicts to come: the Second Great Ninja War, the Third, and even the Fourth. Corpses would continue to pile up in every war, and peace would always remain elusive. Tsunade remained silent, still processing his words, when Orochimaru suddenly spoke again, his voice low. Strange. Why hasn't the second Hokage returned yet? Tsunade snapped out of her thoughts, blinking in confusion. That's true. Not only hasn't my granduncle returned, but Hiruzen-sensei is missing too. Her concern rising, she ran up to a nearby ninja who had just returned. Sayama-senpai. The man turned at the sound of her voice, his expression brightening. Ah, little Tsunade. What can I do for you? Do you know where Lord Hokage is? Didn't he come back with the rest of the troops? Oh, the second Hokage? Sayama paused, then smiled. Lord Hokage and several other higher-ups went to the border to sign an alliance agreement with the Land of Lightning. They'll be back in 2 days. Oh, I see. Thank you, Sayama-senpai. Tsunade replied cheerfully, her initial worry fading. But while Tsunade seemed reassured, Orochimaru's mind was spinning. The second Hokage went to sign an alliance agreement with the Land of Lightning? He thought, frowning. Why does that sound so familiar? Then, in a sudden moment of clarity, it hit him. The Kinkaku Force Coup! The Gold and Silver Brothers. The second Hokage was about to walk straight into a deadly trap. The second Hokage is going to die. Chapter 34. To be honest, Orochimaru wasn't particularly impressed by the second Hokage, Senju Tobirama. During his time in Konoha, Orochimaru had rarely seen the second Hokage in person. The only time was when he accompanied Sarutobi to the front lines. The day-to-day tasks of their squad were mostly delegated to Hiruzen, their direct instructor. As for Orochimaru, other than seeing the second Hokage give the occasional large lecture from a distance, he had no direct interactions with him. The demands of the war kept the second Hokage busy, and it was rare for genin like Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and Tsunade to even get close to the Hokage, unless it was a matter of utmost importance. Because of this, Orochimaru didn't feel particularly connected to the second Hokage. So, when he pieced together that Tobirama was about to meet his tragic end at the hands of the Gold and Silver Brothers, he could only offer a silent apology in his heart. Would Orochimaru try to prevent the second Hokage's death? Not likely. He would have liked to alter the course of history, sure, but certain things were beyond his control. Some events were meant to happen, and others weren't worth the risk of changing. Even though Orochimaru had grown stronger far beyond the average genin, he was still only 9 years old. No one would take a child seriously if he suddenly ran up to them, declaring that the second Hokage would be killed in a coup orchestrated by the Gold and Silver Brothers. They'd look at him like he was crazy, and he might even end up locked away in a cell or worse, subjected to interrogation and experimentation for how he possessed such knowledge. Even if Hiruzen backed him up, the higher-ups might still view him with suspicion. After all, how would a boy know something like that? Besides, if he were completely honest with himself, what did Senju Tobirama's life or death have to do with him? Orochimaru wasn't the person he used to be, not after everything he'd gone through. The hard lessons from his previous life had taught him that good people often meet unfortunate ends, while those who are ruthless survive. Orochimaru had no interest in playing the hero or meddling with fate. He had no personal attachment to the second Hokage, and getting involved would only endanger his own future. Sure enough, Orochimaru's predictions came true. 7 days after the ninja had returned to the village, Hiruzen and the other higher-ups returned as well. But with them, they brought Uchiha Kagami's body. Then, just 3 days later, Konoha received the second Hokage's body, transported back from the Land of Lightning. With that, the winds of change swept through Konoha village. First, there was the grand funeral for the second Hokage. Every Konoha ninja, Orochimaru included, was present. The atmosphere was somber, with an overwhelming sense of disbelief hanging in the air. Many of the villagers couldn't wrap their heads around what had happened. How could the second Hokage have died in battle when they had won the war? Hadn't the Land of Lightning already surrendered? What most didn't know was that the Land of Lightning was also a victim of treachery. Their second Raikage had also perished during the negotiations, a result of the coup led by the Gold and Silver Brothers. Next came the official appointment of Hiruzen as the third Hokage. The second Hokage had named him his successor in the final moments of his life, making it clear who would carry on the mantle of leadership in Konoha. However, despite the second Hokage's dying wish, Hiruzen's ascension to the position of Hokage was not without opposition. Within Konoha, power struggles simmered beneath the surface. Many were dissatisfied with Hiruzen becoming the next Hokage. Among those who harbored resentment was none other than Shimura Danzo, Hiruzen's longtime friend and rival. Danzo had always dreamed of becoming Hokage himself. Ever since their days as students, he and Hiruzen had been locked in fierce competition. But now, due to a single order given by the second Hokage before his death, Danzo's hopes were crushed. He had no chance of claiming the title of Hokage as long as Hiruzen was alive. And it wasn't just Danzo who was disgruntled. The Uchiha clan, one of the founding clans of Konoha, was also deeply dissatisfied. The village had been built through the combined efforts of Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara, yet not a single Uchiha had ever been named Hokage. They could understand the first Hokage being a Senju, since Hashirama and Madara had fought side by side to create the village. The second Hokage's position was also accepted, given his bloodline as the younger brother of Hashirama. But Hiruzen? He had no such lineage. He wasn't a Senju or an Uchiha. So why should he be named Hokage? Unfortunately for the Uchiha, their discontent was muted. After years of harsh treatment under the second Hokage's rule, the clan had grown quiet, unwilling to voice their grievances too openly. Fear of further persecution kept them in check. With the funeral behind them, it was time for Hiruzen to solidify his position as Hokage. One morning, in the Hokage's office, Hiruzen sat wearing the Hokage robe for the first time, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. Behind him stood Danzo, his closest confidant, though the tension between them was palpable. "Danzo," he said, his tone soft yet apologetic, "I'm truly sorry about what happened. The second Hokage appointed me, and I had no choice but to accept the position. I know this is something you've always wanted." Danzo's face twisted in anger, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. "Don't apologize, Hiruzen. It's meaningless now. Our teacher made his decision, and I will respect it. But tell me this, how do you plan to keep your position as Hokage?" Hiruzen frowned, sensing an underlying hostility in Danzo's words. "What do you mean by that, Danzo?" Danzo sneered. "Don't tell me you haven't noticed the voices of dissent in the village? Do you think everyone is going to sit back quietly while you take the title of Hokage?" Hiruzen chuckled confidently, waving off Danzo's concerns. "I believe that with time and effort, I can earn the trust of everyone in Konoha. I'll show them that I'm worthy of this position." But Danzo's patience snapped. He slammed his fist on the table, glaring at him. "Stop being naive, Hiruzen. Konoha was founded by the Senju and the Uchiha. Your last name is neither. If you don't quell this opposition, you won't last long as Hokage." Sarutobi's expression darkened. "And what exactly are you suggesting, Danzo?" "Give me control of ANBU, Danzo said coldly. "I'll make sure to silence anyone who dares to oppose you." Hiruzen looked at him with a mix of disbelief and anger. He knew Danzo was ruthless, but was this really the solution? Chapter 35, Danzo truly was ruthless in his approach, always favoring the most extreme measures to solidify his influence. As soon as Hiruzen assumed the mantle of Hokage, Danzo's thoughts immediately turned to eliminating dissenters. "No, you can't do that," Hiruzen said firmly, understanding the implication of Danzo's suggestion right away. His tone left no room for compromise. Danzo's plan was simple and brutal: send the opposition on dangerous missions where the likelihood of survival was slim. They'd either die at the hands of enemies or through unfortunate accidents arranged by their own comrades. It would be clean and efficient, just as Danzo liked it. Hiruzen, however, was the inheritor of the first Hokage's ideals. While he could be ruthless to enemies of the village, he found it difficult to condone the unnecessary deaths of his own people, especially over political disagreements. "We are all ninjas of Konoha," Hiruzen said, his voice strained with frustration. "We must not turn on our own like this." Danzo, unfazed by Hiruzen's moral objections, calmly replied, "Hiruzen, you are not suited for this position." His voice was steady, his gaze cold. "A village cannot survive on light alone. It must also have its darkness. You are too naive to see that." The two men, longtime friends but now divided by ideals, stood at an impasse once again. Hiruzen believed in a future for Konoha built on trust and cooperation, while Danzo saw only the need for control and fear to ensure the village's security. Danzo, as always, was prepared to do whatever it took to maintain stability, even if that meant resorting to covert killings. In his mind, the ends justified the means. He had no qualms about creating a shadowy underbelly for the village if it ensured its survival. But with Hiruzen now in charge, Danzo had no choice but to relent, at least for now. He couldn't openly disobey the new Hokage. Grudgingly, he agreed to Hiruzen's insistence on taking a less aggressive approach for the time being. However, Danzo had another idea in mind. If not that, then at least let me establish an independent ANBU training unit, Danzo suggested, his voice devoid of emotion. I'll take charge of training them, leaving you free to focus on the larger issues of governance. It will take the burden off your shoulders. Hiruzen was taken aback by this. ANBU training class, he repeated, as if he hadn't heard correctly. Danzo's proposition felt like a bid for more power, something that would allow him to operate freely and without much oversight. Danzo nodded. Yes. You're Hokage now. You'll have a lot on your plate, too much for you to handle alone. Leave the more delicate matters to me. Hiruzen closed his eyes, wrestling with the decision. He knew what Danzo was truly after, autonomy, a way to build his own faction within Konoha. He had always wanted to be Hokage, and while that dream had been snatched from him, this was Danzo's way of gaining influence in the village through other means. An independent ANBU unit? A power separate from the Hokage's direct control had never existed in Konoha since its founding. It would set a dangerous precedent. Hiruzen hesitated. He didn't want to create a political rival right under his nose, but at the same time, he understood Danzo well. If he rejected this outright, Danzo might resort to something even more drastic, something irreparable. After much internal deliberation, Hiruzen finally agreed. All right, but we need to discuss this with Koharu and Hamura first. Danzo's expression barely changed, but inside, he was pleased. Of course, he said. He knew the two elder advisors wouldn't oppose his plan. Koharu and Hamura had no family backgrounds of note, and they owed much of their positions to the second Hokage. They would side with Sarutobi, and they wouldn't challenge Danzo's ambitions, not as long as it didn't threaten their own positions. Thus, Root, an ANBU unit independent of the Hokage's regime, was formed under Danzo's command. Its purpose would remain secret, known only to a select few. Meanwhile, in front of Orochimaru's house. Orochimaru. Tsunade's voice broke the silence. What is it? Orochimaru responded, his tone indifferent. Will you take a walk with me? Orochimaru paused for a moment, then nodded. All right. The two of them strolled down the streets of Konoha, the midday sun casting long shadows behind them. Orochimaru wore his usual white robe adorned with Magatama symbols, while Tsunade was dressed in green, with short sleeves and shorts, her waist tied with a blue sash. After a moment of silence, Tsunade spoke again, her voice filled with a strange melancholy. When do you think this war will end? Her question was out of the blue, catching Orochimaru off guard. But as he glanced at her, he saw the sadness in her eyes. She had seen so much loss on the battlefield, and it had clearly weighed on her mind. I don't know, Orochimaru replied honestly. But I do know one way to end all wars. Tsunade looked at him in surprise. She hadn't expected a real answer, much less from someone as young as Orochimaru. Oh? What's that? Without missing a beat, Orochimaru's reply was cold and direct. Unification. Unification? Tsunade repeated, her brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? Only through unifying the 5 great ninja villages can true peace be achieved, Orochimaru said, his tone devoid of any humor or jest. Tsunade blinked, stunned by the seriousness in his voice. You're joking, right? The 5 great villages have been at each other's throats for years. You think unifying them is possible? Orochimaru shrugged. It's not easy. But it's not impossible. Tsunade shook her head in disbelief. You sound like a madman. Orochimaru didn't respond. Instead, he changed the subject, his tone casual. Forget it. Let's go get some roasted chicken. I'll treat you. The abrupt shift in conversation threw Tsunade off. Huh? How did you know I like roasted chicken? I've seen you sneaking off to buy it by yourself more than a few times, Orochimaru said, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Tsunade flushed, embarrassed. I didn't think you noticed. It's hard not to. Tsunade laughed, the somber mood lightening. I didn't think you paid attention to other people, Orochimaru. Orochimaru shrugged nonchalantly. Nothing special. And if I remember correctly, Jiraiya asked you to eat with him plenty of times. Ugh, I'd never go with that big pervert. Tsunade exclaimed with a scoff. He doesn't know how to behave. Besides, someone like you is far more tolerable. Orochimaru raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Tsunade smirked playfully. Of course. If I had to pick between you and him, well, let's just say you'd make a better boyfriend. Orochimaru muttered, seemingly uninterested. Tsunade blushed again, though she tried to hide it. I'm just saying, when we grow up, maybe. Maybe, Orochimaru replied vaguely. But let's see what the future holds. Tsunade's face brightened, but she quickly tried to play it off. So you agree, huh? Orochimaru simply gave her a small, mysterious smile and continued walking, leading her to wonder what exactly he meant by that. Chapter 36. Facing Tsunade's direct question, Orochimaru was momentarily caught off guard. If both of them were adults, perhaps he might have flirted back or even indulged in his darker thoughts. But now, he was still a child, and no matter how advanced his intellect or how strengthened his physique was, that didn't change his age. At least, not in ways that mattered for this situation. He gave Tsunade a casual, dismissive response and changed the subject quickly. Together, they arrived at the village's well-known grilled chicken restaurant. Hey, look at that, Tsunade muttered as they entered the shop. As soon as they stepped inside, they spotted an acquaintance. Oh? Orochimaru? Tsunade? Haha. What brings you here? Come. Join me. A young man with white hair, dressed in a white outfit, stood up from his table and waved enthusiastically at them. Hirako? You're eating here alone? Orochimaru asked as they approached. Tsunade chimed in after him, Where's Jiraiya? Didn't he come? Hirako laughed and replied, That guy? He's off doing some special training as usual, right? Yeah, probably off somewhere trying to perfect that weird technique of his, Tsunade said with a casual shrug. While the three of them, Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and Tsunade, were usually together for missions, their individual pursuits often kept them apart. Jiraiya was busy mastering sage techniques, something that had once been a closely guarded secret but had since become something of an open secret among their circle. Hirako smiled. Well, I'm not eating alone. I came here with Dai. He just stepped out for a moment. As if on cue, a young man wearing bright green tights emerged from the restroom and walked over to their table. He was none other than my Dai. Now, let me introduce you properly, Hirako said, turning to the man in green. This is my Dai, a fellow shinobi. Orochimaru was momentarily taken aback. Of course, no introduction was necessary. He already knew my Dai. But what surprised him was the connection between Hirako and Dai. The two seemed like such an unlikely pair. But then again, maybe it wasn't that surprising after all. Hirako, 1 year younger than Orochimaru, had become something of a follower of the Sannin trio ever since Jiraiya had once stood up for him. Meanwhile, Might Dai, despite his later legendary status, was known as the perpetual underdog during these early years, often teased for his lack of ninjutsu skills. It made sense that the two of them, both outcasts in their own way, would form a bond. Orochimaru watched Might Dai closely, studying him. While Dai was known as a failure among his peers, Orochimaru knew better. This was the man who would one day master the 8 gates and push his body beyond its limits to protect those he loved. His legacy would be passed on to his son, Might Dai, who would become one of Konoha's most formidable shinobi. Nice to meet you both, Might Dai said, bowing respectfully. I've heard a lot about you both. Please teach me. Tsunade, clearly a bit flustered by Dai's intense respect, scratched the back of her head awkwardly. You don't have to be so formal. We're all comrades in the same village. Thank you, Tsunade-sama. Might Dai responded earnestly, making her even more uncomfortable. Orochimaru, on the other hand, remained silent, observing the interaction. This party is something special. 2 dead last, and 2 geniuses. 2 types of people who would normally never come together, but due to various circumstances, they've ended up sitting together by chance. However, Orochimaru, who knows the storyline, naturally won't underestimate these 2 dead last. Might Dai, the founder of the 8 Gates Release Formation. On the other hand, Hiriko was unwilling to remain mediocre. In order to catch up with the Sannin, he developed a forbidden technique called Chimera Jutsu. This forbidden technique allows him to fuse ninjas or summon beasts with his own body, and it can even integrate Kekkei Genkai. It can be said that this is extremely similar to Orochimaru's genetic fusion. Although his Chimera technique is fundamentally different from Orochimaru's genetic fusion, the fact that he can achieve this on his own is undeniably impressive. When Orochimaru first encountered Hiriko, he had already added him to his list of potential experimental subjects. He just hadn't decided yet whether Hiriko should be his test subject or his subordinate. Of course, no matter which it is, now is not the time. After a lively meal, during which Hiriko insisted on paying the bill, the 4 of them left the restaurant together. As Hiriko and Might Dai waved goodbye and walked off, Tsunade nudged Orochimaru with her elbow. "Hey, Orochimaru," she began. "That guy in green, why do I feel like I've seen him somewhere before?" "We all live in the same village, Tsunade. It's not strange to run into familiar faces," Orochimaru replied casually. No. I mean, he seemed familiar in a different way." Tsunade frowned, trying to remember where she had seen Might Dai before. Orochimaru raised his hand to respond, but just as he was about to speak, whoosh! 2 ANBU shinobi appeared in front of them, seemingly out of nowhere. Their sudden appearance interrupted the conversation. "Orochimaru, you've been summoned by the Hokage," one of the masked shinobi said, his voice monotone yet urgent. Orochimaru smirked slightly, feeling a sense of satisfaction. "Looks like they've finally decided to acknowledge me," he muttered under his breath. Tsunade raised an eyebrow, confused. "What's going on?" Orochimaru waved her off. "Don't worry. I've been expecting this." With that, he followed the ANBU toward the Hokage's office. Chapter 37, Hokage Conference Room. The 3rd Hokage, Hiruzen, sat at the head of the table, draped in his Hokage robe, signifying his role as Konoha's leader. Flanking him were the 3 elders of the village, Koharu Udatane, Hamura Mitokado, and Danzo Shimura. Together, these 4 individuals held significant influence over the village's governance. However, missing from the group were 2 prominent figures, Akimichi Tofu and Uchiha Kagami, both disciples of the 2nd Hokage, Tobirama Senju. Akimichi Tofu, though respected, represented the interests of his clan, making him unsuitable for Konoha's upper political echelon. As for Uchiha Kagami, he had perished on the battlefield. Even in life, despite his loyalty and being trusted by Tobirama, his Uchiha heritage would have barred him from truly entering Konoha's highest ranks. The Uchiha clan, long viewed with suspicion, was always kept at arm's length from positions of ultimate power. The subject of today's discussion had finally shifted to Orochimaru, Hiruzen's prized pupil. After resolving the finer points of Danzo's newly established division, Root, the focus turned toward the young prodigy's groundbreaking research. "You're telling me that the potion developed by Orochimaru can give people an extraordinary recovery ability?" Danzo's expression was one of deep skepticism as he addressed Hiruzen. His voice, typically calm and collected, now betrayed a hint of incredulity. Having been entrenched in diplomacy following the peace agreement with the Land of Lightning, and then dealing with the funeral arrangements for the 2nd Hokage, Danzo and the others had only just returned to normalcy. Now, Hiruzen was speaking of Orochimaru's latest discovery, something that echoed the legendary regenerative powers of the 1st Hokage, Senju Hashirama. "Indeed. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes," Hiruzen said, his tone serious. The recovery rate of ANBU members using Orochimaru's serum was remarkable. It didn't just heal minor wounds, it expedited the healing of deep injuries. Koharu and Hamura exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by the news. If true, this potion could revolutionize Konoha's medical practices and bolster its military might. Danzo, however, remained unconvinced. It's impossible. Hashirama's healing power was the result of his unique bloodline. Many researchers, even Orochimaru's seniors, have tried and failed to replicate that kind of ability. How could an 8-year-old boy accomplish what seasoned experts could not? Hiruzen sighed, understanding Danzo's reluctance to accept the truth. You know I wouldn't bring this up lightly, Danzo. If you're skeptical, why not investigate it yourself? I will, Danzo replied, his voice sharp. I need to see this with my own eyes. Hiruzen knew that Danzo's curiosity, mixed with his hunger for power, would push him to scrutinize Orochimaru's research thoroughly. Danzo was never one to let a potential weapon slip through his fingers. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of knocking filled the room as Orochimaru, dressed in his casual attire, entered the conference room. He carried himself with a calm confidence, his eyes observing the room carefully. Teacher, Orochimaru greeted Hiruzen with a respectful bow, acknowledging the elders as well. Ah, Orochimaru, Hiruzen said with a warm smile, I'm glad you've come. You probably have an idea of why we've summoned you today, don't you? Indeed, teacher, Orochimaru replied smoothly. He had been waiting for this moment. Hiruzen leaned forward, his tone more serious. We've been discussing your remarkable work, the healing serum you created. I must say, it's extraordinary. Your potential for research is beyond what any of us could have predicted. Orochimaru's gaze remained steady. Thank you, teacher. I have always believed that scientific research could open new doors for the village. Danzo, who had remained silent, suddenly interjected, Tell us, Orochimaru. How did you develop something that rivals the first Hokage's legendary healing power? Orochimaru expected this line of questioning. He had long anticipated that his research would attract the attention of Konoha's higher-ups. Maintaining his calm demeanor, he explained, the serum's development came from extensive study of various herbs and medicinal plants. Some ingredients are rare, and while I have succeeded with this batch, the scarcity of certain materials might limit further production. The room fell silent as the elders processed what he had said. Danzo was the first to break the silence, his eyes narrowing. Scarce ingredients, you say? So, it's not something that can be easily mass-produced? Orochimaru nodded. Correct. I've identified 2 specific herbs that are critical to the serum's effectiveness, and they are not easy to come by. Replacing them might reduce the serum's potency. Hiruzen and the others felt a wave of both relief and disappointment. While the potential of Orochimaru's research was undeniable, its limitations were also clear. Danzo leaned back in his chair, clearly still skeptical but intrigued. We will have to investigate this further. For now, your research will remain confidential. You'll continue to develop it under the supervision of Konoha's top scientists. Orochimaru gave a slight nod, accepting their decision. He had expected this. By keeping his cards close and revealing just enough of his abilities, he had secured a place within Konoha's inner research circle. Very well, Hiruzen concluded, Orochimaru, you may return for now. We'll finalize the arrangements and let you know how we'll proceed. With a polite bow, Orochimaru turned and left the conference room. As he exited the building, a faint smile tugged at his lips. Things were moving just as he had planned. After Orochimaru left, Danzo excused himself as well, his mind still racing with possibilities. His first stop was to find Eagle, one of the ANBU members who had witnessed the results of Orochimaru's serum firsthand. Eagle was patrolling the outskirts of the village when Danzo approached. Lord Danzo, Eagle greeted with a respectful nod. Danzo wasted no time, getting straight to the point. I need you to confirm something for me. 2 months ago, you accompanied Hiruzen on a mission to eliminate the Kumo Ninja Division, correct? Yes, that's right, my lord, Eagle responded, his posture rigid. Danzo's eyes narrowed as he continued. And during that mission, several of your team members were injured. Orochimaru used some sort of serum to heal them. Is that correct? Eagle hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yes, my lord. His serum was unlike anything I've ever seen. It sped up the healing process in a way that shouldn't be possible. Even deep wounds healed quickly. Danzo's mind raced. Could it be true? Could Orochimaru have stumbled upon something revolutionary? If so, it was something Danzo wanted to control whether Hiruzen liked it or not. Very well, Danzo said finally, turning away. That will be all. As he walked away, a plan began forming in Danzo's mind. Whether Hiruzen realized it or not, Orochimaru's talents were far too valuable to be left unchecked. And if Hiruzen wasn't willing to take the necessary steps, then Danzo would. After all, Konoha needed more than just light, it needed the darkness, too. Chapter 38, Danzo, after listening to Eagle's recount of Orochimaru's experiment, quickly formulated his own thoughts. He had to suppress the growing sense of amazement as he considered the implications. Without a word, Danzo left and made his way to the ANBU headquarters, where he found the injured fox. Inspecting the fox's wounds, Danzo confirmed Eagle's account. A wound that had once been deep enough to expose bone now bore no trace, not even a scar. Even the old, long-standing injuries had vanished, as if they had never been there. It was as though the serum had not just repaired the damaged cells but had somehow regenerated them entirely. Regeneration at the cellular level? Danzo's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary medical achievement, it echoed the legendary healing abilities of the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama. Orochimaru had somehow unlocked the secret to advanced regeneration, and at such a young age. Unbelievable. Danzo muttered, barely able to contain his excitement. In that moment, Danzo's view of Orochimaru shifted. He had already noted Orochimaru's intelligence and talent, but this? This was a breakthrough that could change the very nature of warfare. It had the potential to make Konoha invincible. Danzo was both in awe and deeply intrigued. Danzo resolved to keep an even closer eye on the boy. Orochimaru's potential was too vast to ignore. If cultivated properly, he could become an irreplaceable asset to Konoha or to Danzo's ambitions. Meanwhile, Orochimaru, walking through the bustling streets of Konoha, was lost in his own thoughts. Despite the admiration from Konoha's top brass, Orochimaru was not overly impressed with his own work. In truth, he considered the gene repair serum to be relatively basic compared to what the future held. In the world of Naruto, there were many techniques that far surpassed the effects of his gene repair solution. The healing abilities of the sage body possessed by Hashirama, or the powers of Karen Uzumaki's bloodline, were significantly more advanced. There were also other abilities that could provide exaggerated regenerative effects which could resurrect someone even after a fatal injury. Not to mention the monstrous healing potential of Tsunade's creation rebirth technique, which could restore her even after catastrophic damage. In comparison, Orochimaru's serum was just a stepping stone. But to the untrained eye, especially in a village like Konoha, it was nothing short of revolutionary. The village elders had no idea of the true scope of his plans, and for now, Orochimaru was content to keep it that way. His primary goal was to gain more resources and access to advanced materials for further experimentation. As he wandered the crowded streets, Orochimaru sighed quietly. Konoha, despite its role in the recent war, was still full of life. The bustling markets, the laughter of children, and the chatter of the villagers filled the air. This village was not only the military powerhouse of the Land of Fire but also a symbol of peace and prosperity, built on the hard work of countless civilians and ninja alike. In Orochimaru's eyes, however, the village was just a means to an end. Orochimaru! Orochimaru! A familiar voice called out, interrupting his musings. Turning around, Orochimaru spotted Tsunade waving at him from a nearby food stall, looking as excited as a child. She stood in front of a skewer stand, the savory scent of grilled meat wafting through the air. He walked over, raising an eyebrow. "What is it now?" Tsunade pointed eagerly at the skewers. "Can you buy me some skewers?" Please! Orochimaru sighed, realizing what was going on. I just left the Hokage's office, and you're already hungry again? Tsunade, in her usual straightforward manner, didn't even try to hide her hunger. I didn't get enough to eat with Byairi and the others earlier. You know how it is, I have to keep up appearances. Orochimaru let out a chuckle. He knew all too well about Tsunade's massive appetite. Even though she came from the prestigious Senju clan, she often ate like a commoner, especially when it came to her favorite foods. With a resigned smile, he handed some money to the vendor and bought 10 skewers. As he passed them to Tsunade, he turned to leave. Hey, wait up! Tsunade called after him, running to catch up. Are you going to eat some too? I'm heading to the training grounds to practice ninjutsu, Orochimaru replied, brushing off her offer. You can eat without me. Tsunade grinned, clearly enjoying her meal. Then I'll come too. Let's go. At the training grounds, Jiraiya lay on the grass, completely spent from his own training. He stared up at the sky, his brow furrowed in frustration. Why am I working so hard? Jiraiya muttered to himself. Every ninja needed a reason to fight: money, power, love, or something more personal. But Jiraiya, at that moment, was struggling to find his own motivation. Suddenly, the memory of Tsunade's casual dismissal came to mind. She had told him, more than once, that Orochimaru would make a better boyfriend than him. The words echoed in his mind, stinging more than any punch or kick. Tsunade, she really likes Orochimaru. Jiraiya clenched his fists, a look of realization crossing his face. Then the answer is simple. He leaped up, his face lighting up with determination. I'll become the strongest ninja. I'll make Tsunade and every other girl admire me. Just as he was about to dive back into training, he noticed something in the distance: Orochimaru and Tsunade walking toward him, side by side. Tsunade was happily munching on a skewer and occasionally offering a piece to Orochimaru, who accepted it reluctantly. Jiraiya's heart sank. Ah, why do you always do this to me, Tsunade? Jiraiya groaned, dropping to his knees in despair as he watched the scene unfold before him. Chapter 39, Jiraiya was on the verge of going mad. Orochimaru, I challenge you, he shouted, his voice full of determination. At the Konoha training ground, Jiraiya, with his wild white hair, stood fiercely in front of Orochimaru. His face was twisted in frustration and determination, his eyes burning with the desire for a duel. Orochimaru, on the other hand, looked calm, almost indifferent. It didn't take much for Orochimaru to piece together what had happened. Jiraiya must have seen him and Tsunade together just moments ago, with Tsunade teasing him as usual. The sight had probably triggered Jiraiya's burning need to prove himself, and here he was, demanding a fight. Jiraiya clenched his fists. Orochimaru, fight me like a man. His voice was full of passion, reminiscent of their days at the Ninja Academy when he would challenge Orochimaru almost daily. Before Orochimaru could even respond, Tsunade, who was lazily munching on a skewer, scoffed, Jiraiya, give it a rest. With your current strength, you're no match for Orochimaru. Tsunade's words hit Jiraiya hard, but his determination didn't waver. I don't care. I'll fight him, no matter what. Jiraiya's stubbornness had fully kicked in. He was in full second-year syndrome mode, shouting dramatically, Orochimaru. Come on, let's settle this right now. Idiot, Orochimaru muttered under his breath. He had no interest in humoring Jiraiya's ridiculous challenge. He knew exactly what was going on in Jiraiya's head: jealousy, insecurity, and a desperate need to prove himself. But there was no point in indulging this. Come on, Orochimaru. Jiraiya yelled again, determined not to let Orochimaru walk away. He stepped forward, fists raised. Hit me! Fight me like a real ninja. Orochimaru sighed. He knew Jiraiya wouldn't give up unless he got what he wanted. As Jiraiya lunged at him, Orochimaru sidestepped smoothly, dodging his punch with ease. With a swift counter, Orochimaru delivered a sharp kick to Jiraiya's midsection, sending him flying backward. It was the same move he had used against Uchiha before, but with Jiraiya, he held back, not intending to cause any serious harm. Jiraiya crashed onto the ground but quickly recovered, landing on his feet with a hard slide that left a trail of dust behind him. Damn, he's stronger than I thought. He clenched his arm, still feeling the numbing force of Orochimaru's kick. Give it up, Jiraiya, Orochimaru said coldly. You're not ready for this fight. Jiraiya's face twisted in frustration. No way! I've been training hard these past 2 months. I'm not the same person I was before. With newfound resolve, Jiraiya quickly formed a series of hand seals. Fire style, flame bullet. A massive stream of fire erupted from Jiraiya's mouth, a blazing inferno that shot toward Orochimaru. The sheer heat of the flames warped the air around them, and the roaring fire raced to engulf Orochimaru. Tsunade, who had moved off to the side to watch, raised an eyebrow at the sight. Huh, looks like Jiraiya's not holding back. Despite the intensity of Jiraiya's attack, Tsunade remained calm, almost bored. She knew Orochimaru far too well to be worried. In fact, she was so unconcerned that she sat down on the grass to watch, as if it were a casual show. The flames engulfed Orochimaru entirely, creating a massive wall of fire that seemed almost impenetrable. Jiraiya watched the fire rage on, but he didn't relax. He knew Orochimaru wouldn't be taken down that easily. As the flames slowly died down, there was no sign of Orochimaru. Where did he go? Jiraiya muttered, his eyes scanning the training ground. Suddenly, his instincts kicked in. Without thinking, Jiraiya leapt forward, narrowly avoiding a sneak attack from beneath the ground. Orochimaru's figure emerged from the earth, rising out of the dirt like a phantom. He had used earth release to burrow underground and avoid Jiraiya's fire attack entirely. Earth release? Jiraiya frowned. Orochimaru had mastered the multi-element jutsu of their teacher, Hiruzen Sarutobi, long ago. He knew how dangerous Orochimaru could be with that knowledge. It seems I won't get any peace until I defeat you today, huh? Orochimaru sighed, shaking his head. That's right. Jiraiya grinned, biting his thumb and quickly forming seals again. Summoning jutsu. Orochimaru, remember this day. This is the day that I, the great and handsome Jiraiya, defeat you once and for all. A loud bang followed by a puff of white smoke filled the air. When the smoke cleared, a large toad stood beside Jiraiya, its face twisted into a frown of annoyance. Jiraiya! Why do you always summon me during my nap time? The toad grumbled. Quit complaining! I need your help to defeat Orochimaru. Jiraiya shouted back, full of confidence. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed as he saw Jiraiya summon a toad from Mount Maiboku. So, you're serious about this, he murmured to himself. Without hesitation, he clasped his hands together, preparing his own summoning. Summoning jutsu! Orochimaru called out. Another bang filled the training ground, and out of the smoke appeared a massive flower-patterned python, even larger than the toad. Its scaly body shimmered in the sunlight, and it hissed ominously as it coiled itself beside Orochimaru. Tsunade, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but laugh. Oh great, they've both gone all out now, she said, taking another bite of her skewer. Chapter 40. Orochimaru didn't recognize the name of the toad Jiraiya had summoned, nor did he know its specific species. He only knew one thing: no matter which toad Jiraiya managed to call upon, it wouldn't stand a chance against his snake. After all, snakes were the natural predators of toads. Unless Jiraiya could somehow summon the two great sage toads, Fukasaku and Shima, from Mount Maiboku, no matter what toad he summoned, it would only get beaten. Sure enough, when the flower-patterned python behind Orochimaru hissed and flicked its tongue, the toad that Jiraiya had summoned began to tremble, sweat dripping down its forehead. The toad seemed to regret being summoned, internally cursing its fate. In its mind, Jiraiya was sending it into the lion's den, or rather, the snake's den. It had already endured plenty of training sessions with Jiraiya, but now, being thrown into a fight against Orochimaru's snake was far from ideal. "Why do I always get dragged into these battles?" the toad muttered internally, bracing itself for the inevitable. Onlookers around the training ground couldn't help but gasp in astonishment as they watched the clash between the two young ninja prodigies. At their age, they're already summoning creatures with ninjutsu, one student exclaimed. "That's Orochimaru, right? He used to be in our class." "Yeah, he's always been incredible, but Jiraiya? I didn't think he had it in him to summon something like that." Other students, standing at a safe distance, marveled at the spectacle. Witnessing two kids barely out of the ninja academy engaging in such advanced techniques left them in awe. Most of them were only beginning to master basic jutsu, and seeing summons at play was a sight they couldn't even dream of achieving anytime soon. Among the crowd, some of the more timid students began to back away, intimidated by the sight of the giant snake that Orochimaru had summoned. Its scales shimmered ominously in the sunlight, and its gaze was fixated on the toad with predatory intent. Meanwhile, in the trees surrounding the training ground, two shadowy figures observed the battle with heightened interest. Hidden by the dense foliage, they blended seamlessly into their surroundings, wearing the signature animal masks of the ANBU Black Ops. One of the ANBU operatives held a monocular up to his eye, keeping a close watch on the ongoing fight. "It's unbelievable that these two are still just genin," one of the operatives murmured in amazement. "Yeah," the other replied. "Most chunin can't pull off what these kids are doing. It's no wonder Danzo-sama ordered us to keep a close eye on them. With power like this at their age." "Wait, something's happening," the first operative interrupted, noticing movement. Back in the middle of the training ground, Jiraiya gritted his teeth. He had just leaped through the air, riding on the back of his summoned toad, but the giant flower-patterned python swung its tail with terrifying speed, knocking both Jiraiya and the toad through the air like ragdolls. As they flew through the sky, the toad voiced its frustrations. "Jiraiya, if you summon me again for a fight like this, I swear I'm done with you." Before the toad could say anything else, it disappeared in a puff of white smoke, leading Jiraiya to crash land into the ground, creating a shallow crater upon impact. "Ugh! Damn it! Orochimaru's too strong." Jiraiya groaned as he sat up, rubbing the back of his head. He hadn't expected Orochimaru to use Jinjutsu on him and the toad so suddenly. Although the illusion had only lasted a moment, it was enough for the snake to take advantage and deliver a devastating blow. Jiraiya had barely managed to break the illusion and defend himself, but the snake's strike had left him dazed and in pain. Orochimaru stood calmly, observing the outcome of his Jinjutsu. Using a basic illusion technique like demonic illusion, hell viewing technique had worked well enough against Jiraiya, but he knew that such simple illusions wouldn't be effective in a real battle against stronger opponents. Jinjutsu is all about disrupting the opponent's chakra flow and creating a window of vulnerability, Orochimaru mused. He recalled the principles taught by his sensei, the third Hokage, Hiruzen. Jinjutsu required great spiritual power to interfere with the chakra system of the target. The stronger the caster's spiritual energy, the more effective the illusion. However, when facing high-level opponents, especially those with vast amounts of chakra, simple Jinjutsu wouldn't suffice. It would take far too long to disrupt their chakra flow, and in the meantime, they could easily break free or counterattack. The true masters of Jinjutsu, like the Uchiha, use their Sharingan to amplify their spiritual power, making their illusions far more dangerous. Orochimaru's thoughts wandered to legends like Uchiha Madara and the unimaginable power of techniques such as Tsukuyomi and Izanami illusions that transcended the normal limitations of Jinjutsu. Still, for now, using Jinjutsu against someone like Jiraiya was enough. "Alright, you can go back now," Orochimaru whispered to the snake in his mind. The python flicked its tongue before vanishing in a puff of white smoke, leaving Orochimaru standing alone in the middle of the training ground. As the snake disappeared, an idea sparked in Orochimaru's mind. "Since I've already signed the blood contract with the snakes of Ryuchi Cave, most of them obey me unconditionally. Could I use my genetic research to create a more powerful snake? A snake even stronger than Manda? Perhaps something 100 times more formidable?" He could already picture it, a snake with monstrous strength, one that could surpass even the greatest summons in the ninja world. System, is there any genetic technology that allows me to create a custom-made summoning beast? Orochimaru asked in his mind, his curiosity piqued. Yes, host, the system replied. Really? What is it? Biological genetic evolution fluid, the system answered. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 3. Peace.